It was 10:31 when my phone buzzed. Emergency alert. Do not enter underground structures such as basements. Stay above ground until the all clear. My husband looked up from his phone and stared at me. Did you just get a... Yeah. That's creepy, I said, glancing at the stairs. Our kid had fallen asleep for the night about an hour ago. What do you think's going on? I don't know, he replied. Could it be like a gas leak? Radon or something? We had had a radon pump in our basement since we had moved here. Maybe there was some weird influx of it or something. I ran up the stairs to check on our 5-year-old daughter as Luke flicked on the TV. Grace was sleeping peacefully, her blanket wrapped around her. I made sure that she was breathing, comfortable, totally fine before heading back downstairs. When I did, Luke was glued to the TV, which said the same thing. A black screen, pixelated white letters, blocky colors jittering along the top and bottom of the screen. Emergency alert. Do not enter underground structures. Maybe we should get out of here, I said. But it's late and Grace has school tomorrow. Yeah, so? We'll miss school. We can go to my mom's. Luke crossed his arms and stared at the TV. He then flicked to CNN and other news channels, but whatever was happening here must have been local, because it was the same political drivel re-airing from earlier in the day. There was not a blip of the emergency alert anywhere except the local news channel. I pulled out my phone and did some Google searches. Nothing came up. So I shot off a text to Lacey, the mom of one of Grace's friends, who lived in the next development over. We had only lived here since the school year had started, so it's not like I had a whole network of people to ask. She didn't respond. I think we should, I said, grabbing a duffel bag out of the closet. What about work? Don't you work remotely on Mondays anyway? Yeah, but... I walked over to our basement door. The chain was latched. I hurried into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and pulled out some postal tape. What are you doing? If it's radon or something, I don't want that stuff all in our house, I said, crouching along the bottom and taping the crack under the door. I think that they would evacuate us if that were the case. I looked up at him as I yanked another long piece of tape off the roll. Okay, so what do you think it is? He shrugged. When I had taped all the cracks, I brought the duffel bag upstairs, filled it with a few random outfits for me and Grace, along with my laptop and a few of her favorite dolls. And then I grabbed the cooler and loaded our leftover pasta and yogurts into it. Within 10 minutes, I was ready to go out the door. I'll pack up the car. Can you go and grab Grace? I asked. Luke went upstairs. I walked down the driveway, weighed down with bags. It was a chilly and clear night. Stars twinkled high above me. The street was exceedingly quiet, the tall, scraggly pines of the surrounding pine barrens stretching up to the sky. I heard the echo of a dog barking somewhere. If everybody got the alert, wouldn't there be more people deciding to leave? I glanced at the house across the street. It was completely dark except for the light above the garage that flicked on when I came out of the house. I opened the back hatch and threw our stuff in. Luke came out after, carrying Grace, wrapped in blankets. She blinked sleepily. I strapped her in and Luke grabbed some stuff, and then we were pulling out of the driveway on the road to my mom's house an hour away. She fell back asleep. I told Luke, watching her face flick into view with the light of the passing street lamps. Good. My phone buzzed. I reached for it. Emergency alert. Your phone's GPS indicates that you're leaving city limits. We do not recommend evacuating. Please return home and stay above ground. What the heck? I whispered. What? Luke asked. There's another alert. It's saying it knows that we're leaving. It's tracking our GPS and it's telling us to stay. Luke glanced at my phone. Wait, seriously? Yeah. That data's supposed to be private, he said. Isn't it? I would think so unless, I don't know, maybe there's some emergency protocols that allow the FBI to access it or something. We fell into uncomfortable silence. Luke clicked on the turn signal and switched lanes. You don't want me to turn around, right? He asked quietly. I glanced down at my phone. No, I don't. The highway was empty, not a single car in sight. That made me uneasy. I mean, surely other people would be evacuating, unless they were all actually obeying the second message. But who even trusts the government these days? I did another Google search. No results popped up. I refreshed over and over again. Wouldn't something be on the internet by now? We were 5 miles out of town now. I should be relieved, but I wasn't. I leaned against the window. The cold glass pressed against my forehead. The pine trees flashed by, skinny and tilted, and then gave way to a charred and barren patch of forest. Both sides of the highway were burnt to the ground. I had read somewhere that some pine cones only opened in extreme temperatures, like from a wildfire. Fires and regrowth were part of the cycle here, part of the ecosystem, in flux between death and rebirth like a phoenix. My phone buzzed, and my heart dropped, but it wasn't an alert. It was a text from Lacey. Only 2 words. What alert? My fingers raced across the screen. Didn't you get an emergency alert saying to stay above ground? No. Lacey didn't get an alert, I said. Luke paused. What? What if the alerts were only sent to our phones? I asked, my voice shaking. I glanced back at Grace, still peacefully asleep, head lolling softly from each bump of the car. Luke shook his head. That's crazy. Nobody can send messages like that. Just the government or whatever. What if it's a trap? My voice shook harder. What if the only safe place was our basement? That's just your OCD talking, he said softly and emphatically. We're doing the right thing. There's something weird going on in town, like a gas leak, and we got out. That's obviously the safest thing to do. I stared out at the charred pines. There were a few that hadn't burnt up, standing tall and stilted in the darkness. I stared out at them, wondering why they were spared. One of them moved. What the? The car screeched to a stop. My body lurched forward, the seatbelt locked, keeping my head from hitting the dash. Sorry, that deer just... His voice died in his throat. We both stared at the lower legs of something illuminated in the headlights. Thin and spindly, but definitely not a deer's. They ended in twisted toes, not hooves, and extended several feet up into the darkness. Silhouetted against the starry sky beyond the reach of our headlights, I could see something. Something tall and spindly, skeletal. Crisscrossing lines of bones or sticks or something else entirely. As I stared at it, as it stared at me, a wave of dizziness washed through me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Weight pressed down on my head, and immense pressure bearing down on me. Thwack! Something at the side of the car with incredible force. The entire car rocked on its wheels. I screamed. Thwack! A mess of lines, bones, sticks outside my window, empty air between them, the stars and the pines rippling strangely behind it. Luke stomped down on the accelerator. The car shot forward. We swerved around the thing and then past the burnt section of forest and continued down the dark and twisting highway. My phone buzzed. Emergency alert. All clear. Please return home immediately. We got to my mom's house around midnight, a squat brick ranch on a residential road. I glanced warily at the pines behind her house stretching up to the sky before picking up Grace and carrying her inside. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for us, her fingers wrapped against the mug in her hand. The entire house smelled like that familiar mix of coffee and dust. I started for the guest bedroom, and then I got a better idea. The ranch had a lower level that was half underground. It had been finished into an office, but there was a couch down there. I could have Grace sleep on the couch and we would sleep on the floor. "Where are you going?" Mom was standing behind me, eyebrow raised, as I undid the chain lock to the basement floor. "I think we're going to sleep down there." "No, you're not. It's all dusty down there. I haven't cleaned for ages. There could even be mice and we're sleeping down there." "Those alerts were probably just a prank," she continued, "or a glitch or something. Besides, you're like an hour away now." I had only told my mom about the alerts. I didn't tell her about the thing in the woods. My mom was not a supernatural person. She would definitely chalk it up to a trick of the light or something. Casper himself could be floating in front of her face and she would call it a trick of the light. "Oh, you're being ridiculous," she continued. "You know, this reminds me of that time that you taped up the door to the attic. You remember that? When the exterminator had found a bat up there, you were worried that there were more with rabies, and they could flatten themselves through the cracks between the door and the ceiling and bite you while you're sleeping." "You don't feel the bites when you're sleeping," I growled back. "A lot of people have gotten rabies from bats in their houses, and they can squeeze through really tiny places." "My point is," she interrupted, "it's unsanitary down there." And Grace was getting incredibly heavy in my arms. I glanced at Luke, who was just standing in the doorway wide-eyed, like he had walked in on a gunfight. And then I pulled the chain lock and yanked the door open. "Kate," Mom said warningly. Halfway down the stairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I got Grace settled on the couch and then pulled it out. "Emergency alert. Your phone's GPS indicates that you have stopped in redacted New Jersey. Disobeying an emergency alert is a federal offense. Please return home and stay above ground." I lifted my phone to show Luke, who was coming down behind me. His face looked ghastly pale in the white light. Mom was right behind him and craned her neck to read the alert too. "Oh, that's BS, she said. "It's not a federal offense, it's a state offense. And that would be an evacuation order like for a hurricane or something." She shook her head. "You know what this sounds like? One of those scammers. I got a call from someone claiming to be my grandson." "It's not a scam," Luke interrupted without elaborating. And then he worked in silence, putting the blanket over Grace and getting her comfortable. I flicked on the light and checked for mouse droppings, but I didn't see any. "I'll get the rest of our stuff," he said, leaving my mom and I alone. Her expression softened as she looked down at Grace, at her perfect little face. "Do you need anything else?" "No, I don't think so." She nodded and went back upstairs. I glanced around. The office stuff was in the leftmost corner, the desk covered with papers and a single photo of my dad. He had been gone for 7 years now, and it seemed like every year, more and more of his stuff got tucked away, moved downstairs, shoved into storage. I swallowed down the feeling and glanced around the rest of the room. The door next to the desk led to the unfinished storage area. On the other end of the basement was a sliding glass door that led out into the backyard. I didn't like that at all. We were technically underground where we stood, but the rightmost corner with the door was above ground. Did that mean that we were still vulnerable? Those things couldn't fit through a glass door, I thought, but they couldn't fit through a normal door either, and apparently we wouldn't have been safe in our own home. I stared out the glass door, afraid that I might see one of them out there. Maybe this was a bad idea to stay here. We were an hour away, sure, but the pines were still right at our door. Not officially the Pine Barrens, but the surrounding pinelands ecosystem, which was almost the same thing. If those things came from the Barrens, they were only in the burned areas, I reminded myself. I imagined a pine cone spiraling in midair, petals opening as fire raged around it, and skeletons made of sticks prying their way out of the thing, creeping along the ground and stretching and growing towards the sky. Were there any maps of the burned areas? I pulled up Google Maps looking for the blackened areas, but the information would be out of date, wouldn't it? My phone buzzed. I expected another alert, but it was a text from Lacey instead. My friend Rochelle got the same alert that you did, by the way. Super weird. My heart dropped. And did Rochelle, whoever she was, listen to it? Tell her not to listen to the alert, I started typing. It's a trap. And then I realized how unhinged that sounded. I didn't even know Lacey that well. I thought for a second and then typed a new message. Can you give me your number? I want to ask her about it. It's pretty weird that it targeted both of us and no one else. Sure, let me ask her, was the reply. As I waited, Luke came back down the stairs carrying our stuff, computer cords and stuff nearly falling out of his arms. Someone else got the alert, I whispered. One of Lacey's friends. Really? Yeah, I asked for her number. A minute later, the number came in. I dialed it immediately. On the third ring, she picked up. Hello? Hi, this is, Kate, Lacey's friend. I started awkwardly. We got the emergency alert too, but we think that it's a trap. There's something off about it. A pause. But it came from the government. How could it be a trap? It seems like nobody else is getting it. When alerts are sent out like that, they're sent to all the phones in a certain location. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, I don't know, it's weird. Well, we were just about to go to bed here, so I'd better go. Wait, I think the basement is safe and everything else isn't, I said quickly. I think someone's trying to lure people into staying above ground. Okay, maybe, she said unconvincingly. Look, I gotta go, sorry. A few seconds later, the call ended. Oh crap. She didn't believe me, I said, looking up at Luke, my lip trembling. She and her kids and her family, they're all going to. Hey, you tried, he said, wrapping his arms around me. That's the best you can do. I couldn't help it. I cried as we lay on a blanket on the floor and got ready to sleep next to Grace. I looked down at her perfect little face, and then Luke and I snuggled under the blankets together. Hey, kiddo. I woke up with a start. For a second, I thought I was in my own bed, but then the roughness of the carpet, the aching in my back, it brought me back to reality. My father's voice, rough and warm, lingered from the dream. I could almost feel his arms around me, the summer sunlight beating down on us as we played at the creek behind the house. I rolled over to check on Grace. Her eyes were wide open. She was staring behind me, at the sliding glass door. Slowly, she raised a hand and pointed over my shoulder. I turned around. There was something twisting and turning, contorting itself, trying to get in through the sliding glass door like a dog through a cat door. It did it silently except for a low clicking sound, like the popping of joints. All the blood had drained from my face. Dark, sinewy legs like spider legs, twisting and turning in the moonlight, squeezing itself ever so slowly through the hole that it made. I now saw the shattered glass scattering the floor. I grabbed Luke and shook him. Luke! The thing fell still. I couldn't see eyes or a face, but I felt it in my gut. It was staring at me. Dizziness swept over me. I stumbled forward, losing my balance. It was like I was standing on the deck of a boat. The ground seemed to shift and tilt underneath me. I just wanted to lie down until the world stopped turning. No, I screamed internally. You can't let that thing get Grace. I glanced around the room looking for something that could be used as a weapon. Anything. Go in there, I said to Grace, pointing to the storage room, or at least I thought I was. Everything was tilting and moving around me. Go, hide. I stumbled forward, but all the colors were bleeding together now. Everything was hazy as a dream. My father was standing in front of me, standing there in the basement, but his face was all wrong. His eye drooped out of his socket, like something had squeezed his skull. His grin was crooked. Hey, kiddo, he said in a voice that sounded off-key. Nausea filled me and I started vomiting. Warm liquid down my shirt, splashing on my feet. My dad, not my dad, stood tilted, like gravity had suddenly changed. One arm was too long and hung limply from its socket. I miss you so much. Stop, please stop. Come with me. We can be a family again. Stop. I never got to meet Grace. Wouldn't it be so wonderful for me to finally meet her? The world tilted and shifted. I stared at my father, his left eye drooping like jelly. His crooked smile, his gaunt face, his limp arms. I opened my mouth. Hot pain shot up my shoulder. I fell to my knees instantly. I tried to cry out, to say stop again, to tell Grace to run for her life, but all that came out was a scream of pain, and another and another. When I finally opened my eyes, the world had stopped tilting. Luke was dragging me across the floor back from the glass window. Grace was peeking out of the storage area, terrified. I touched my shoulder, stinging with pain. My fingers came away red. It bit me. I'm dying. What? My phone began to ring. Shaking all over, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. I recognized the number. It was Rochelle. You're right, she said breathlessly, no preamble. What? I asked, my voice hoarse. About the alert. My husband, he has some friends who work with cell phones and stuff, and She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. They traced the signal. It's not coming from the government or the town hall or whatever. I chewed my lip and held my breath. It's coming from the middle of the woods. The hospital was mostly empty. Quiet, dark, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the walls were a sickly shade of seafoam green. The doctor, a tall, thin man in his 60s, didn't seem to believe my story, but he admitted me for observation anyway. My mom was staying at her friend's house with Grace in their non-walkout basement. I didn't want to leave her. I wanted her right here with me, but the hospital was above ground, and someone needed to treat my wound before I bled to death. Luke left me for a moment to use the bathroom. I closed my eyes, not intending to sleep, but I was so tired and the bite was now only a dull throbbing pain. I drifted in and out of consciousness until I heard two voices in the room. I snapped my eyes open for a moment to see the doctor and a nurse hovering over me. They were talking softly to each other, looking concerned. I quickly shut my eyes again, pretending to be asleep. I caught a bit of their conversation. It's just like that man, the nurse whispered. The one that was admitted last night. John something. A pause. I know. What do you think this is? I don't know, Rita. I really don't. Do you think that we should give her a diazepam, preventatively? The nurse asked. The other one, he screams so much. The family will ask questions. There's no reason for her to be on diazepam for an animal bite. Well, they'll ask questions when she's dead, too. The nurse snapped back. The least we can do is make her comfortable. Shh. Oh, God. I didn't open my eyes, but I had jumped when the nurse said dead. I now could feel both of them looking at me, their eyes boring through my closed lids. Let's talk somewhere else, the doctor said. Hurried footsteps on tile, and then nothing. I opened my eyes. I'm going to die. I don't know how long I lay there wallowing in my own misery, but footsteps jolted me awake. Luke was walking back in. How's the pain now? Bad. I told him what I had overheard, my voice quivering. That doesn't mean anything, he said, but I could hear the concern in his voice. We're going to get you out of here and everything's going to go back to normal. The mayor or whatever will release some statement about a faulty alert system, and... Stop. He looked at me warily but shut up. The two of us sat in silence. A few times Luke opened his mouth looking like he was going to say something but then quickly shut it again. Footsteps pattered by outside in the hallway. The tinny sounds of the TV droned on in the corner. I'm going to call Rochelle, I told him. The line rang 3 times before she picked up. I told her everything about the bite, about the things that I saw. I was afraid of sounding crazy, but when I had finally finished, she sounded like she was crying on the other end. I saw my baby, she said in a low tone, barely above a whisper. I had a miscarriage at 14 weeks, and I saw this little basket with a tiny pink thing bundled up inside, and I heard her cry. Her voice broke. I knew it wasn't real, but I still went toward it, before Ravi pulled me back. I'm so sorry, I said, the phone trembling in my hands. Thank you. But it didn't hurt you, right? Bite you or claw you? No, I don't think so. The silence stretched out between us. So what do we do? I asked. Just run from it forever. I've been talking to someone who knows about this more than we do. Maybe I should come see you. What hospital are you at? She told me that you would be there in an hour. Rochelle was a short, thin woman with brown skin and thick-framed glasses. She wore a t-shirt with some sort of video game reference on it and faded jeans. As she hurried in, she was wringing her hands, twisting them over and over again. Following after her was a woman in her 50s. Her salt and pepper hair was cropped short and her skin was deathly pale, like she had never seen the sun. This is Jamie, Rochelle said, gesturing to the older woman. She's a professor and specializes in this kind of stuff. I've been talking to her for the past few hours and she wanted to see you. This kind of stuff. The woman abruptly sat down and leaned in towards me, like I was some kind of specimen that she was eager to examine. You know what's going on here? I asked, as she stared at my shoulder in a way that made me extremely uncomfortable. Well, yes, sort of. Have you ever heard of something called speculative evolution? No, I replied. Okay, it's reconstructing what kinds of creatures would evolve under different circumstances. Maybe an amphibian would evolve to have wings like a bat, for example, if insects didn't hover around ponds. You see what I mean? I guess. We also try to construct what animals might look like millions of years from now, or humans. What kind of things will evolve under the pressure of modern humanity, modern technology? There's already some of it happening. The bedbugs in New York City are hundreds of times more resistant to pesticides than the ones in Florida are. And deer are more skittish than they were 10 years ago because cars kept hitting them. Okay. I had no idea where she was going with this. You haven't seen that image of what humans would look like if they were evolved to survive car crashes. The man has like no neck and lots of fat to cushion the impact. No? Okay, she shook her head. The point is, some people in this field believe that at some point, creatures would evolve abilities that mimic technology, like birds that look like drones or bats that can sense electromagnetic fields. Who's to say this thing that you and Rochelle have described hasn't evolved the ability to send out radio signals, hack our entire mobile system? Okay, that's ridiculous, Luke interjected. So what, this creature is like texting, in English? Oh no, nothing like that. States, local governments, They often have pre-programmed emergency messages, like a protocol for hurricanes, earthquakes, nuclear threats, etc. This thing, it just hacked a signal to send a particular protocol. Same thing with Rochelle. She said, looking sympathetically at her. We're all sending little electromagnetic signals in our brains all the time. Neural impulses. Sharks, 400 million year old living fossils can detect them. These things, they can hack them. So when I saw my dad, I glanced at Luke. That thing was hacking my brain signals. Jamie nodded. Oh, it's a little more complicated than that. I believe this thing sends out a chemical in the air too, at close range that messes with some neurotransmitters. But essentially, yes. Okay, but why is the basement safe then? Because it's too big for them to get down there, Luke asked. Well, I'm glad you asked that, Jamie replied with a big, victorious smile on her face, like she was just about to tell us the secret to the universe. They chose that emergency protocol with the basement because their abilities don't work if you're underground, just how your phone reception goes out when you're underground. A heavy silence filled the room. Luke and I looked at each other. For one, this sounded pretty out there, conspiracy theory level stuff. More unbelievable than Roswell. On the other hand, nothing that I had experienced in the past 24 hours had made sense. How do you know all of this? I asked. This isn't the first time that it's happened, she replied, her face grim. Almost 10 years ago, the same thing happened out by Woodland, on the border of Wharton State Forest. I studied it then too, but there weren't as many of them. Okay, but the text didn't get sent to everyone, Luke said. Only us and Rochelle so far that we know of. Right, so these things, I call them stickmen by the way. They only target people with overactive imaginations. People who send out really clear and strong brain signals. It's easier for them to find you and it's easier for them to hack your brain. They're not actually producing the image you see of your deceased loved ones or whatever. They're just knocking it loose from your memory, from something that you've imagined. If you've imagined your kid disappearing 1,000 times because you have anxiety or OCD, that makes it all the easier for them to use it against you and lure you in. And of course, there's more for them to eat. More for them to eat. Yeah, they eat brains. I mentioned that, didn't I? More awkward, heavy, suffocating silence. Kate said that she heard the doctor saying she's going to die, he said in a soft voice. Is that true? Jamie glanced at me but stayed silent. Rochelle jumped in, her voice full of heartache. Jamie told me that if one bites you, it's linked to you. It will follow you and end you. It'll show you your worst nightmares first. Jamie interjected, absolutely unable to read the room. Show you everything you fear. But when it starts showing you yourself in these waking nightmares, that usually means you only have a day left. I swallowed a wave of nausea, and then I started getting out of the hospital bed. I needed to get out of here, away from Jamie's stare, Luke's concern, and just a moment of silence. Maybe I would get a Coke from the vending machine, not even a diet one. I hadn't had a full sugar one in ages. I tried to keep out the memory of my dad before me in my mom's basement. I had imagined him saying those exact words. When I was at my lowest point years ago, when a flicker of suicide showed itself in an ocean of postpartum depression, and that stickman or whatever has used it against me. Another wave of nausea. I pushed towards the door. Wait, Rochelle said, standing up and reaching for my arm. I'll be right back, I snapped. I made my way down the empty hospital hallway, beeping machines and echoing footsteps in the distance. Tears pricked my eyes. I kept going, making a left and then a right, following the signs for the vending machines. My feet shuffled along the ground, taking me there slowly, ever so slowly. Kate, stop. I turned to see Luke coming after me. He stopped 6 feet away, trying to give me space. "I just need a minute," I replied, my voice shaky. No, it's not that. Your mom just texted me and we have to go. Grace." His voice broke, and my heart broke with it. "What happened?" "She fell," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not awake. They're rushing her to the hospital." "To the hospital? You mean here? They're taking her here?" I asked frantically. "They're taking her to the hospital," he repeated. Something twinged inside me. That doesn't make sense. That's not an answer. I looked down. No. On the floor, something black, slick and wet on the green linoleum floor. A tendril like a long umbilical cord attached to Luke's foot and leading down the hallway. I felt dizzy. The world started to tilt. "Kate!" I turned around to see Luke behind me, frozen, eyes wide. I looked back. The other Luke was no longer standing there. It was me. I was staring at my own face. I wish that I could say it looked different, one eye popping out, skin all blistered and pink, but it wasn't. It looked exactly like me, like looking in a mirror. I looked down. Other me was holding a pillow. She held my gaze for a second and then looked down at the floor. I followed her gaze. Grace was lying at my feet, eyes closed, hands resting neatly under her head, fast asleep. No. I knew this intrusive thought. I knew how it ended. It's not real. I turned and ran back down the hallway, reaching for Luke's hand. Rustling behind me, I couldn't look back. I couldn't. Luke pulled me into the room and I followed, breathless. "We have to get underground, it's here." Rochelle and Jamie looked at me, and then they looked at the floor. For a second, I thought I was going to see my worst nightmare, but instead, I looked down to see blood dripping off my arm, seeping through my shirt, traveling in wet, soaky rivulets, dripping to the floor. Jamie shot up and walked over to me. Gently, she pushed back the cloth of my shirt, exposing the wound at my shoulder. "Necrotic tissue," she whispered. She shook her head sadly. "It's begun." "I can't die. I can't." My shoulder pulsed with pain. I continued running down the hall towards the big red exit sign. The hospital hadn't released me. "Stop!" Luke begged, catching up with me, but I forced myself to run faster despite the pain. I wasn't going to just sit in the hospital room and wait to die. Obviously, from what the doctor said, that's what happened to the last one. I was going to get underground. Maybe I would have to stay there forever, or until they found a way to kill these things. I would not leave Grace without a mother. I wanted more than anything to go to her, hug her, to tell her that I loved her. But maybe that thing could follow me even into a basement. I didn't think so, but I couldn't risk it. The best thing that I could do was get underground, buy time. Grace was as safe as she could be with my mom underground. I ran towards the exit. The red sign glowed brightly in the darkness of the hallway. One of the lights flickered overhead. My bare feet slapped against the floor. The floor felt sharp. I kept running, but it didn't seem like I was getting any closer to the exit sign. What the? I glanced back and Luke wasn't following me anymore, nor was Rochelle or Jamie. The hallway extended beyond me, stretching back into the darkness indefinitely. I kept running. The exit door was open now, but still so far away. A stiff breeze blew in, ruffling through my hair. It smelled of pine and wood and decay. Keep running. The ground was so rough under my feet and the air was so cold. The lights above me flickered wildly. The door didn't get any closer, no matter how fast I sprinted. A few leaves swirled by outside in the darkness. Keep running. The lights above me flickered out, and then I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was in the middle of the woods. Pine trees stretched up into the darkness, The sand littered with sharp sticks and rocks bit into the bare soles of my feet. Silence rang in my ears except for a light fluttering sound somewhere in the darkness. No, it tricked me. I wheeled around and I didn't see any lights, any break in the trees. How deep in the barrens am I? How long have I been running? The darkness closed in, suffocating me. I felt my pockets, no phone, no way to call for help, no way to know where I am. I sucked in a breath, ready to scream into the darkness. But that would draw the stickmen to me, wouldn't it? Or did it not matter? Did they already know where I was? I looked up at the stars, at the slices of sky poking through the pines. I tried to identify them. Is that Cassiopeia? But I didn't know anything about how to tell directions from the stars. Besides, the pines blocked out most of the sky anyway. No, wait, that's not the way to do this. I ran in here and my legs didn't feel that sore. Even though it must have distorted time, I had only felt like I was running for a minute. If I had run 10 miles into the barrens, I would have known. I just needed to figure out what direction I had come from. I wheeled around trying to look for footprints, flattened vegetation, any sign of where I had come from. But it was pitch dark out and I didn't have any source of light. There was moonlight enough to see so that I didn't smack into a tree, but not enough to look for footprints in the sand. I stared at the trees, but the branches were up too high and too thin to support my weight. I couldn't climb them to get a better vantage point. I ransacked my pockets again. Nothing. And so I started off in a random direction. Sticks stabbed at my feet. Pebbles rolled underneath my toes. I kept walking forward trying to keep a straight line. The Pine Barrens is 1,000,000 acres, but an acre wasn't that many square miles. I remembered that from somewhere. I tried to focus on doing the math. If I was in the center and I walked in a random direction, how long would it take me to get to the edge? 5 hours or 10, maybe more than that. And of course I had heard the stories. Even without the stickmen, the Pine Barrens were deadly enough. Carnivorous plants, rattlesnakes, and a way of turning people around. It was easy to get lost in the infinite pines. I thought of Grace, Luke telling her that I was gone, her crying and melting down. She needed me. Maybe years ago at that low point in my life right after Grace had been born, I wouldn't have been quite so panicked at the thought of dying. But I was panicking now. I picked up the pace. Sticks stabbed at my feet harder. I tried to keep a straight line, but it was so hard in the dark. And for all I knew, I was just walking deeper and deeper into the barrens. And then I saw it. A clearing. My heart soared. That must be where I came from. It was one of the burned areas. The fire had hollowed out a large clearing. It was lit in silver tones by the nearly full moon, no longer obscured. Some pines still stood, completely bare of needles, skeletal and black. Ash blackened to the pale sand beneath, the color of bone. A few pine saplings poked through the destruction, only inches tall. It was deathly silent. I'm never going to get out of here. I looked up at the blackened pines stretching up to the sky like fingers. Snap. I whirled around. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees, painted in all tones of gray from the moonlight and barely visible among them. I took off into a run, but in my panic I tripped. It felt like I was in slow motion. The sandy, ashy ground rose up to meet me. Pain shot up in my arms and my shoulders screamed in pain. Sticks scraped my cheek. More snapping. I scrambled up to see myself standing there, arms hanging limply at my sides, hair grazing my shoulders. "Let me go!" I screamed. My voice echoed and died into the forest. She stepped closer. I could hear too a wet smacking sound. There was another slimy black appendage attached to her feet, controlling her like she was a puppet. She canted her head at me and her lips split into an unnatural grin. I turned and tried to run again, but an intense wave of dizziness hit me. The ground tilted. Heaviness pressed down on my head. My stomach lurched and I was vomiting, stumbling, tripping in my own puddle of vomit. "Stop," I croaked. I was lying on my back. Warm, wet vomit soaking through the back of my shirt. Twisted black appendages were filling up the corners of my vision, melting in with the twisted black pines stretching up to the sky. The stars above me looked like shooting stars moving across the sky with how dizzy I was. The sky was replaced with my own face. Her hair hung onto my face, sticking to the sweat and the vomit. Her lips curled into a smile, and then her mouth began to open. Wider, wider, wider. Rows of sharp teeth like a lamprey's descending into the darkness of her throat. I tried to push it off, but my hands met slime. I was pinned by the creature, one of the stickmen. It was only her disembodied head hovering over me, attached to a tangled black mess of a creature. "They eat brains," Jamie's voice echoed in my head as the teeth loomed closer. So close that I couldn't see any of the barons anymore. "Grace, what's she going to do without me? She'll never recover. Her entire life will be ruined. I can't. I'm so sorry." And then I realized the stickmen were attracted to brain signals. What if I had done something that I had never done before? What if I just stopped thinking? I closed my eyes, ignored the warm, rotting breath on my face, ignored the slime seeping through my shirt, ignored thoughts of Grace. I used every last bit of my willpower to stop thinking. Nothing, a void, non-existence. A clicking sound came from above me. The creature began to shift its weight. I continued thinking about nothing, absolutely nothing. The creature pulled itself off of me. When I opened an eye, it no longer wore my head. It was twisting and turning, making clicking sounds, lifting some of its appendages in the air, as if confused, as if it thought I had escaped and it was trying to sense me out again. I lay there in the dark, burnt forest, thinking of nothing for seconds, minutes, hours. It was the hardest thing that I had ever done, pushing away thoughts of Grace, of my future, of hers. Pushing it all out and being empty. When the sun began to rise, I pulled myself up. The burnt forest was bathed in the pink hues of dawn. My skin was covered in vomit and black slime. My shoulders still throbbed with pain, and there was no sign of the stickman. It took me another few hours, but in the daylight, I was able to find my way back. After walking around in circles for a while, I caught a glimpse of a road through the trees. I had apparently fled the hospital and run a half-mile into the pine barrens across the street. Luke and the hospital staff were looking for me all night. I was reunited with Grace, and it was the happiest day of my life. I think that the stickman is still linked to me. We've been spending our nights in the basement where we've been totally safe. Rochelle, Jamie, and I have been working together to figure out how to kill it for good. Some guy online from the incident 10 years ago claims that drowning them works. But for now, I am content to be home and be safe. Even if it isn't forever, and a million bad things are waiting to happen. This is an ad by BetterHelp. Men today face immense pressure to perform, to provide, and keep it all together. So it's no wonder that 6 million men in the US suffer from depression every year, and it's often undiagnosed. I personally struggled with this the past few years, and I found that therapy really does help. It's given me a place to share what's on my mind and vent, versus just bottling everything up. With over 35,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. It's super easy to get started. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you find the time to fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/MrCreeps. That's better, HELP.com/MrCreeps. I lay weeping in bed, trying my best to keep my sobs at an absolute minimum, lest I wake up my father to suffer another beating. Only moments prior, I had been scratched badly by the satanic spawn that we called a cat. Not to give anyone the wrong idea. Even at the age of 4, I loved animals, but that creature was something else entirely, scooped out from my deceased uncle's apartment, feral and full of hatred. At the smallest provocation, it would dig its claws into our skin, which was of course the reason why my father forced it to sleep in my room. Afraid that my blood would stain the sheets, I snuck down into the kitchen to wash myself off as quietly as I could. I shivered as I passed the basement door, hearing the familiar groans emerging from the depths. My mother had blamed the sounds on the wind, but without any windows or even a faint draft pulling through, something about it was clearly wrong. The cat rushed past my legs, hissing as it rushed under the sofa. I hated that creature and the connection to my father it represented. Ignoring it, I proceeded into the kitchen. I turned the tap just enough for a few drops of water to pour out onto my dripping wound. It burned as I cleaned it, but I couldn't even let out a mild yelp in pain. I couldn't risk waking my parents up. I carefully tore a piece of paper towel from its roll, checking behind me in fear. And then I heard a sound emerging from the entrance, sending a wave of panic down my spine as I worried that I might have woken my parents up despite my best efforts. But the fear was immediately replaced by relief, as I realized it was just the basement door creaking open. With a slightly damaged frame, it tended to slide open at random points throughout the day and night. Small taps echoed through the living room as I heard our cat rush down into the basement. The last time it had been let in there, it somehow broke its leg on the way down. Another event where fault was placed in my hands. If my father somehow figured out that I had let him down there again, he would know that I had let it out at night, which meant that I would pay for it in the morning. So, as much as I hated the creature, I had to venture down into the basement and retrieve him before he managed to hurt himself. I hid the paper towel in my pajama pant pocket, leaving no trace behind as I followed the little beast down into the basement. As I reached the door that stood ajar, I could hear him hissing from the bottom of the staircase. A part of me worried that he might scratch or even bite me again, but I would rather suffer 1,000 cuts from his claws than another beating from my so-called guardian. I proceeded, taking single, slow steps down the creaky staircase. The cat had fallen silent, but a new sound had taken its place. A bizarre, squishing sound, akin to meat being pushed through an old hand-driven grinder, coupled with heavy breathing. Still, I continued, too worried about the consequences if I refused. Cracking sounds followed, crunch after crunch echoing up the stairs, and then stepping on a rotten piece of wood, the step broke, sending me pummeling down the rest of the stairs, where I roughly landed on the concrete floor below. And by then, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. In a mixture of pain and fear, I started to sob, crying loudly in the darkness, alone in the night. My only solace was that the sounds in the basement might not be making up to the bedroom where my parents slept. Maybe I would even be allowed to weep in peace. But reality begged to differ, as a presence in the darkness had awoken. "Why do you cry, child?" a deep, raspy voice asked. I turned around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. It hadn't been either of my parents, I knew that much. Yet it felt oddly familiar. "Here," it let out in a mere whisper. The sound had come from a wall in the darkest corners of the basement, one just barely touched by the faint moonlight daring to shine in from the living room above. Only then did the metallic stench and scent of rotten meat hit my nostrils, causing me to recoil in disgust. On the floor lay a pool of fresh blood, shining gently in the dimmest of lights. It had come from our cat, I could gather that much, but the rest of his body was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Smokey?" I asked with a trembling voice. "You cared for the small creature?" the voice asked, seemingly curious. "No, I hate him," I let out in protest, almost angered by the mere sentiment. "Then why do you want to find it? I have witnessed the pain it has caused you. I have heard your cries." "He belongs to my dad," I explained. "He'll be angry at me." "I apologize," the voice said. "I require sustenance." Though young, I was well familiar with the concept of death, and with a pool of blood before me, and its stench following, I realized there was no turning back. I started crying again, knowing how badly I had messed up. "What am I going to do?" I sobbed to no response. "Who even are you?" "Who I am," it repeated. "I do not know." The peculiar statement somehow set a stop to my whines. It was such an odd concept in my young mind that a sentient being able to talk didn't have an identity that it was aware of. "You don't know?" I asked. "No." "Who are you?" it asked in return. "I'm Helena," I introduced myself. "Why don't you have a name?" "I was never granted a name." "Why not?" "No person has ever acknowledged my presence. I have been alone for millennia." My childhood mind was easily distracted. Presented with such a unique, bizarre situation, I could refocus my mind away from the horrors that would undoubtedly await me in the morning. "How about I name you then?" I asked, starting to feel almost comforted by the being's unexplained presence. "What name will you bestow upon me?" I let out as I mulled over the best name a 4-year-old could conjure. "How about Leo?" I suggested, stealing the name from one of my favorite cartoons. "Yes, Leo will suffice," the voice said. And that night, an extraordinarily bizarre friendship began. Living far out in the countryside with close to no other kids my age, I really hadn't grown up with anybody other than the occasional stray animal wandering onto our land. So having somebody that I could talk to without being fearful made me feel the first ounce of happiness that I had experienced during my albeit short stay on Earth. Oddly enough, when providing an excuse to my parents that our cat had escaped through a window at night, I wasn't punished all too severely. In fact, they both seemed relieved that the monster had vanished from our house, and the traces of blood tainting the basement had all but vanished as night faded in the morning light. Following that event, I took it upon myself to feed Leo. I would usually go down into the basement at night and spend a few hours after dark talking to Leo. I fed him whatever scraps of meat we had left behind in the fridge, which he appreciated as he told me stories of a world that I hadn't the faintest chance of comprehending. I quickly learned that only flesh could sustain him. He explained to me that the fresher the meat was, the better, but to get a hold of the food I had to be sneaky. Usually I would await my father's return from work. He would always stop by the barn for a few drinks and would end up getting quite drunk. I could smell the alcohol reeking off of him as he stumbled into the living room, only to pass out onto the couch. Once I could hear him snoring, I would sneak into the kitchen, put some crumbs on a plate which I placed next to him on the sofa, and feed the rest to the kind beast in the basement. Doing that, my father would usually wake up in a drunken slumber in the middle of the night, thinking that he had mindlessly consumed it before passing out. For 3 years, this strategy worked. My father still remained the scum of the earth that he had always been, but he remained none the wiser about the fact that I had a friend living within our basement walls. Over the years, he had even begun to grow. His voice had gotten more prominent. Even a mouth had formed in the walls, one filled with jagged and rotting teeth. Every day that I would feed him, a task growing progressively more difficult as he grew larger. Inevitably, the food stolen from our fridge would be too much. Just before my 9th birthday, Leo had asked for a larger meal. I stole the majority of a leftover rotisserie chicken, but as I stumbled back to the basement, the snores emerging from my father's mouth abruptly stopped. "What are you doing, you little piece of crap?" he asked, angry at me before he even realized what was going on. But then he saw the chicken, obviously thinking that I was about to steal it for myself. "What the heck do you think you're doing?" I wasn't," I stuttered. What followed was the same cascade of drunkenness that I knew all too well, followed by a few slaps to the face, leaving behind red marks and a black eye. I took it all knowing there was nothing I could say to justify my actions, knowing that I was too weak to defend myself, and knowing my mother feared the man just as much as I did. I was alone and left with no one in the world to protect me. No one except for Leo. "Why are you crying?" Leo asked as I greeted him that night. "What happened?" "My dad," I began, unable to continue between sobs. "I couldn't get you the food, I'm sorry." "Let me punish him," Leo said, a suggestion that I had heard before but one that I had rejected on several occasions. "I can't," I repeated. "Why would you defend a man who has caused you nothing but suffering since the day you emerged into this world?" Leo asked, almost sounding disappointed. For a moment, I wondered what our lives would be like without him. If my mom and I could finally find some semblance of peace without that monster looming above us. Maybe I had just finally reached my breaking point. Or maybe I was starting to lose empathy as I aged. Whatever the case, on that day, I finally agreed to let the wall in our basement take care of our greatest problem. "How?" I asked. With that, we formed a simple yet effective plan. But making my father into the basement itself remained our biggest hurdle. It had been moldy and wet for decades and had even been left empty since before I was born. My dad had no reason to descend these stairs unless I tricked him, that was. In addition, I had to do it on a day that my mother wasn't home. Months would pass before the opportunity arose, but when it did, I quickly set the plan into action. As usual, my father returned late at night from the bar and I patiently waited for him to pass out in a drunken stupor. Once he was fast asleep, I took the few toys that I had, strewn them across the living room floor with a trail leading down into the basement. I could have just hidden down there loudly announcing my presence, but though I knew what had to be done, I wasn't brave enough to witness the act itself. All I needed was for the man himself to think I was down there. Sure enough, as soon as he awoke, still slightly drunk, he noticed the mess on the floor. Calling my name to receive no response, he walked along the trail, kicking and breaking the toys as he passed. All the while, he demanded I show myself. What he didn't realize was that I was hiding in the untouched guest room, peeking out through a crack in the door. I stared out in anticipation, only to notice my father hesitate as he reached the top of the basement stairs. "Helena," he said with a slightly softer voice. "Just come up, I'm not mad at you. I just want to talk." He almost spoke with care, too afraid to venture down into the basement, as if he too knew that something beyond his comprehension lurked down there, a being that just didn't belong to our world. "Come on, I'm waiting," he went on. In response, a quiet laugh emerged from the basement. While it wasn't mine, it didn't sound like Leo's either, as if he had attempted to mimic me. In fact, I wasn't sure that I had ever heard my friend laugh before, nor did I know that he was capable of humor. But still, the laugh sent my father back into a blind rage. Screaming my name, promising another beating, he went charging into the basement. In the clear, I rushed out from my hiding spot and jammed a chair under the door handle. He was trapped. There was no way out. "What the heck?" my father began, but his voice quickly turned to blood-curdling screams as the wall got to work on him. His bones cracked and his flesh was torn to shreds as the man screamed in absolute agony. I covered my ears, almost daring to regret an act that I could never undo. Though I held no love for the man, it pained me to hear him helplessly beg for his life. But as soon as the yells had begun, they turned to incomprehensible gurgles as blood filled his lungs. Before long, silence once again filled the empty house and a sense of uneasy peace filled my soul. "Dad?" I called out, checking if I would get a response. "Leo?" I went on, but still nothing. Afraid of the sight that would meet me in the basement, I remained upstairs, sitting in front of the door, half expecting something terrible to emerge from the dark. Hours passed by and my mother eventually returned home from another night shift, finding me on the couch as pale as a sheet. "Where's your father?" she asked, too tired to notice the rough state that I was in. "I don't know," I responded meekly, sure that she would figure out what I had done. But all I got in return was an unenthusiastic, "Huh," before she went to sleep. Even when her husband failed to show himself in the morning, she didn't seem to care all that much, as if his absence didn't bother her. While it wasn't unusual for him to stay out drinking until the middle of the night, he almost always showed himself in the early morning hours. A couple of days turned into a week and my father still hadn't showed up. Though suspicious at first, my mom started to appear more at ease, almost daring to smile. It wasn't until the second week before we finally decided to inform the police, not because we missed him, but because it would seem suspicious if we didn't. It wasn't the first time they had been to our house, seeing how the man treated us and all, but as soon as they appeared, he would be a model citizen, and he would always find a way to make Mom forgive him. Without charges to press, we were left to suffer alone. No proper investigation was ever launched. It was simply assumed that the man had abandoned us, a situation that suited us well. During the next few years, my mom and I would finally get a chance to bond, and my life started improving. Bit by bit, the memory of a nightmarish childhood began to fade. Of course, Leo remained my secret friend up through my formative teenage years, but with his appetite ever growing, feeding him had become somewhat of a problem. Where scraps and raw meat had once sufficed, he now wanted fresh kills. I resorted to getting a part-time job at a local butcher, sneaking out what little that I could, and using the rest of my salary to buy gamed meat from hunters and farms. For a short while, the meat sufficed. It could sustain the growing being in our basement. For every day that passed, more and more distinctive features formed. Arms, fingers, claws. Leo kept getting bigger, almost taking up the entirety of the basement wall. And as time passed, it became abundantly clear that my efforts alone wouldn't be enough to satiate his ever-growing hunger forever. "I require sustenance," he begged. "I just fed you," I argued back. "More," he almost yelled, his voice echoing through the basement. By that time, eyes had formed alongside the mouth, and spikes emerged around the wall, forming a primitive facial structure. "What do you want then? I don't really have any money left." "I long for the taste of living flesh," he said. "Pink, warm skin, trembling muscles, soft fat." "You're talking about," I began, not daring to finish the sentence. "Humans," he went on, finishing the thought for me. "I can't, I'm not a murderer." Hearing my mother parking her car outside, I ended the argument there and I rushed upstairs. Leo had been my guardian for all these years, saving me from my father. But I wasn't about to murder anybody for his sake. Not again. For the next few days, I would toss the meat down into the basement without talking to him, upset with his evolving desires. I started spending more time in my room, far enough away not to hear his soft whispers. But ignoring the creature would not be an option, as one day while chatting with a friend on the phone, I heard a voice calling for me from downstairs. "Helena," my mom called. I ran down to check on what she needed, and I was met by a puzzled expression on her face. "What is it?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," she said. "I just thought that I heard you calling from the basement. Did you want to speak to me or something?" Knowing that I hadn't said anything, it didn't take me long to realize who exactly had called her name from the basement. But not willing to tell her the truth, my thoughts raced to come up with a suitable excuse. I was just talking on the phone. You must have misheard me." I lied poorly, but she believed me, having no reason to mistrust me on such a pointless lie. That night, I waited for my mother to fall asleep before I ventured back down into the depths of the basement. My heart was filled with a mixture of fear and anger. The creature that I had once named a friend had attempted to eat my mother. "You return," Leo said softly, almost surprised at my presence. "You tried to kill my mother," I said, jumping straight to the point. "I must consume flesh," he said, sounding almost weak, his words quieter than usual. "I am famished." "I've been feeding you the same things as I always have been ever since we met." "It no longer satiates me. I require unspoiled flesh. I require living meat." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not doing this anymore." "You would allow me to perish." "I will keep feeding you animal meat, but I'm not going to kill anyone for your cravings, and I can't forgive you for trying to kill my mother." Leo didn't respond, seeming to contemplate my harsh words. I had already decided to end our friendship, but I wasn't ready to let him die. So I would keep tossing down freshly hunted game purchased from local farmers and hunters without entering the basement. That way I could avoid engaging in any sort of conversation with the beast. Only then could I live with a semi-clean conscience. For months and years I fed the beast, never speaking a single word. During the nights I could hear him groan and beg for flesh, but I refused to listen. It was a miracle that my mother never caught on, but in her advancing years, her hearing had started to fade, and her mind with it. Though she had barely entered her 50s, the years of alcohol to deal with the trauma caused by my father, they had worn on her soul, and though I tried to get her help, she never truly recovered. And then one day as I returned home from work in the evening, my mother was no longer there to greet me. I found her body in her bed and she had passed away while taking a nap. There she lay looking as if she were just sleeping, but entirely different. Lighter, tired, absent. I did what I could in a futile attempt at resuscitation, but her body had already gone cold. There was nothing left to be done. It was determined during the autopsy that she had passed peacefully in her sleep. Her heart had grown tired and simply ceased to beat. I could take comfort in the fact that she never saw it coming, and that she at least experienced a handful of semi-happy years before leaving this world. But with her gone, I was truly alone. Another year passed and I remained alone in an inherited house that I knew wasn't truly empty. Once I entered college, I even started dating, meeting a guy, Martin, who seemed to tick all the boxes. Time passed, and though the memories lingered, they appeared as painless scars, serving as little more than reminders of old wounds sustained. For a while, we were happy. He had just finished college by the time that I entered my freshman year. I was 19 and he was 24. He was a private man who moved here from a couple of states over, finding work at a local bar. He never talked about his past, nor why he had left everything he knew behind, which should have been the first sign of things to come, had I only been that wise. Growing up, seeing my mother get hit by my father, I always judged her for choosing a man who could hurt her like that. Though I felt guilty, I couldn't help but pity her for staying. I never thought in a million years that I would be stupid enough to fall into a similar trap. Oh, how naive I was. As it turns out, mistakes can cross the boundaries of generations and can be repeated no matter how careful you think you are. Martin first hit me during what felt like an innocuous argument. He didn't even seem that angry, so I never saw it coming. Too in shock, I couldn't even respond. A man that I thought I could spend the rest of my life with had just put his hands on me, but I was in too deep to just leave. It started with outbursts like these, followed by profuse apologies and love bombing. Then the cycle would repeat. Step by step, my freedom was taken from me. I couldn't dress the way that I wanted. I couldn't spend time alone with the few friends that I had. At some point, I wasn't even allowed to leave the house without supervision. It happened so fast that I almost suffered whiplash. But before I knew it, he had taken full control over my life. The man who had entered my house might as well have been a reincarnation of the man that I called father. No sooner had that realization hit me than I decided that I wasn't going to take this lying down. I started to form a plan of escape. I still had some money from my inheritance left, not enough for a luxurious lifestyle by any means, but enough to leave town and never look back. Martin could have the house for all that I cared. A place haunted by decades of pain, cursed beyond the ability to be cleansed. I just needed to find the perfect time for my escape. I chose the date and waited for Martin to leave for work, and I started packing my bags without hesitation. He never returned home early since he didn't have a flexible work schedule, nor did he call in sick, enjoying the attention that he got from drunk girls at the bar. If only they knew the monster that he truly was. But as I tore down the shelves in a frantic attempt at making a swift escape, something caught my eye. A reflection bouncing off a small glass surface. A camera hidden among my personal effects in my bedroom, pointing directly at my bed where my bags lay half-packed. Without having to ask, I knew that Martin had been watching me from afar, which meant that he would be back home any minute. I decided to drop the rest and leave with whatever I had already packed. But as I ran for the door, Martin entered with a knowing and furious expression plastered right across his face. "You think you can just leave?" he yelled as he pulled the bags from my hands. I tried to push him away, and though I was no weakling by any means, he was far larger. I didn't stand a chance. "How do you not understand this? he said as he grabbed my arm and started pulling me back into the house. "You belong to me." I continued to fight back to the best of my ability, twisting around, punching him, all to no avail. Then with one final push, he pulled my shoulder joint straight out of its socket. "Let me go," I half demanded, half begged between screams of agony. Then, not sure where to put me, he opted for the room closest to our struggle, the one most easily locked up. The basement, a room that I knew lay barren, but one that had never been empty. He ripped open the door and pushed me inside, letting me roll down the stairs towards the bottom, where I remained on the floor, battered, bruised, and with a dislocated shoulder. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you really left me no choice," he said before closing and locking the door behind him. I was trapped. Lying on the floor, I just cried, like I had so many years prior the first time that I met Leo at the ripe old age of 4. And just like then, the beast answered, ready to hear my pleas for help. "Why do you cry, child?" the voice called out, weaker than I had ever heard it before. "I'm not a child anymore," I responded, "and still nothing has changed." "But you are still so little. I can help you," Leo went on, a suggestion that I was all too familiar with. "Not this time," I replied. "I can't keep fighting anymore, just let it be over." "No," Leo exclaimed much louder than before. "It is not your time. You must continue your journey." "Why?" I asked. "What's the point?" "Your purpose is yet to be revealed." "What do you mean?" "Keep fighting." "I can't." "You will." "I'm too weak to fight him." "You are not alone." "Why would you help me after I abandoned you?" My voice trailed off. Before Leo could respond, the door shot open, and Martin stumbled in, a gun in his hand, one that I didn't even know that he owned. "I hate that it had to come to this," he began as he walked down the stairs. "But I can't exactly keep you down here forever. This'll be easier on the both of us." With one arm refusing to cooperate, I pushed myself up and crawled towards the basement wall, knowing fully well that I had no chance of outrunning a bullet. But Martin would want to make it personal. He wouldn't attack from a distance. Sure enough, he descended all the way down the stairs, walked up to me with an empty look in his eyes. He didn't attempt to further explain himself, nor did he offer a chance for reconciliation. In his mind, I had betrayed him, But as I descended the basement on the following day to let Leo in on my plan to serve him, I was met with an empty wall. Where Leo had once lived was a large indent in the basement's foundation, as if he had just upped and left. A sadness emerged in my chest, as though the creature had abandoned me. But just the previous day, he had promised that we were interconnected. It couldn't be a lie. Yet as the weeks passed, the basement remained silent. Even as I tossed down whatever meat I had in the fridge, it just lay on the floor to rot. Leo, whatever he had been, was truly gone from my life. And then reports of missing people started showing up on the news, mostly vagrants or criminals on the run from the police, people that wouldn't quickly be missed, but in a large enough number that people started to notice. They would just vanish with no trace. No bodies were ever found, nor did they show up in any other cities or even states. Week by week, the reports kept getting more frequent, and I knew exactly who was responsible. Leo's hunger had kept growing even after he had emerged from my basement, a lust for flesh that could not be truly satiated. Though the people didn't necessarily deserve to be consumed, I knew there was nothing in this world that could stop him. But even if I could, I had sworn my loyalty to him. It was a thought that followed me even as I slept in my bed at night. I wondered how far he would go before he had finally consumed enough, and if the people killed actually deserved it, or if they were innocents found at the wrong place at the wrong time. Just as I lingered between the world of the waking people and the realms of sleep, a voice snatched me back to attention, one all too familiar. "Hello, little one." Leo spoke softly through the dark, closer than I had ever heard him. Shooting up in bed, I saw a dark silhouette standing in the dark, 9 feet tall, hunched over to prevent his head from hitting the ceiling. Several arms stretched from his torso, ending in razor-sharp claws, and the stench of rotten flesh emanated with his raspy breath. "Leo?" I asked. "Yes," he responded. "I have come for you. It is time." "Time for what?" "Time to fulfill your purpose beyond this realm," he said. "What purpose?" I stuttered. "This world no longer belongs within the reach of mankind's filthy grasp, but you are different. Come with us, and I promise you safe passage to the realm of Irkella. No one will ever hurt you again." "What about the people living here?" "You no longer need concern yourself with their well-being, but you must come with us now." I just stared speechlessly at the creature who had grown up calling Leo, only to now realize that he was something else entirely, spawned from a world that I had no concept of, one focused only on conquering the world that I had grown up in. But as he patiently awaited a reply, I thought back to all the pain and suffering that I had endured, the false kindness that I had been given, only to face years of abuse. If this was the world that I had, I wasn't sure it was the one that I wished to protect. "What do you say, little one?" And with that, my purpose became clear. The entirety of my span in this realm, the lessons that it had taught me, the people that I had to endure, I knew exactly what I had to do. My dad would have never gone into the basement that night if he knew that I was watching him. "God, Danielle, you scared the crap out of me," he said. I knew that he didn't expect to see me because he tried not to swear when I could hear, but he did it twice. Also, he was dragging a heavy load in a white sheet that looked like it had blood on it. It was dark in the kitchen, but there was enough light coming through the open basement door to make it pretty unmistakable. "I woke up to get a glass of water," I explained. "What are you taking downstairs?" He He looked down at the long, heavy object that was wrapped in the sheet. It's a new carpet. For the basement? Yes. We don't have carpet in the basement, which is why we need this one. Go to bed, Danielle. It's a school night. I was pretty sure that he was lying about the carpet, like almost completely certain. Parents think they can get away with lying to their kids all the time, because they forget that growing means losing what we used to believe, and we're growing all the time. I tried very hard to listen to what was happening in the basement, but my bedroom was on the second floor and I couldn't hear a sound, which is much worse than knowing everything. I got home from school at 3:45 every day, and Dad never came back from work until after 6. I didn't want to check the basement alone, but we all do things that we don't want to do. Sometimes it feels like we don't have a choice, even when we're the ones acting. The basement is unpleasant. It's dark even when I pull the chain hanging from the ceiling to turn on the single bulb. We have to walk down the stairs with only the light from the kitchen. It's cold and it smells like bleach. I don't know why we have basements, which hold the stuff that we never use. Dad should have just thrown away the workbenches, the barrels, and the tools that he told me not to ask about. I'm not sure what I was looking for, but I hoped that I wouldn't find it. The concrete floor was clean, very clean, but the stands on the workbench had always been there. The basement still had no carpet. I bent down to search the floor. The coldness rose up from the ground and made me shiver as I got on my hands and knees, but the floor was spotless. If I was going to find anything, it had to be around hidden corners, and it had to be now. Daddy wouldn't be happy if he knew that I was in the basement, so I could only do this once. I pulled back a dirty sheet that was draped over a bench and I reached my hand into the darkness. I felt something. Dragging my hand out, I kept the objects covered, not wanting to know. And then I heard a car pulling into the driveway. Mom was home and time was up. So I scooped the objects and held them close. They were teeth. Grown-up teeth, because they had some silver parts like Daddy has. I felt ashamed when I looked at them. They reminded me of how far from normal I really was. I slid the teeth back behind the sheet and I ran into the kitchen before Mom got inside. Not knowing is worse than anything. Dad sat on my bed and kissed my forehead when I went to sleep, just like he always did. I was relaxed and safe when I felt his weight on the side of my mattress, but we all want our innocence broken, otherwise we would keep it forever. That's why I was hiding behind the sheet in the basement after he put me to sleep. I didn't want to be alone in the dark, and I didn't like knowing the teeth were on the ground next to me. But Daddy clearly didn't check that corner, so it was the safest place to hide. Staying quiet in a dark place is the best way to hear voices. Mom says that it isn't ghosts and that it's just our imagination going wild when all distractions are gone. But that just proves that she doesn't know what ghosts really are. My jeans and sweater didn't keep me warm. I couldn't stop shivering and I wanted to leave. But then the basement door opened and I really wanted to leave, but it was too late. Our desire is always the strongest in the moment that we realize something familiar has become out of reach. Step, thunk, step, thunk, step, thunk. Dad was dragging something heavy down the stairs. Click. I blinked as the light bulb shined dimly through the sheet. I assumed Daddy's eyes wouldn't be immediately adjusted, so I peeked into the room. He was kneeling over another sheet, wrapped bundle on the ground. This one was also bloody. He was sweaty and nervous as he unwrapped it. I had never seen a dead body before, but I knew right away that she wasn't alive. Her skin was the pale color of uncooked mushrooms, and her arms flopped like spaghetti instead of something alive. I wanted to look away so badly. I didn't look away though. Daddy pulled out the saw that spins around in a circle, and I knew that things were about to get gross. I was so disappointed in him. And then her arm moved. The woman's face was still dead, but I watched her fingers squirm like worms coming up from the ground after rain. Daddy didn't notice right away. Things might have been different if he had. He was examining the saw when her arm lifted high. It grabbed his throat like a snake that I had once watched eating a mouse. He dropped the saw and squeezed her hand until his fingers had turned white. But it didn't do any good. I felt like my entire body was in dried cement. I couldn't help him, and I couldn't turn away. I wanted to puke. Her arms came alive as Dad slapped her arm, his lips becoming blue while his tongue bulged. The blood vessels in his eyes changed to pink and then splotchy, and then the white turned red. He got weaker as the punches turned into gentle little slaps, and then he stopped moving. I squeaked. The woman dropped my dad to the floor, and he landed like spaghetti, and then she sat up, pulled the sheet off her body and turned around. She was completely naked and every part of her skin was pale. I wondered if ghosts are white because dead people sometimes have no blood in them. Our brains form weird thoughts during the most shocking moments. She stood, walked over to my hiding place and knelt down. I scooted back, convincing myself that I would be safe as long as I moved to the darkest corner. That works when we're hiding under the covers in our beds, so I decided it would do just as well here. It didn't work. She pulled back the sheet and stared at me as I stared right back. It may have been my very first time seeing a dead person, but I understood enough to know that she was still dead, no matter how much she was walking around. I stared back at eyes that couldn't blink. I breathed and she didn't. I wanted to run away, but I was cornered. I shook. "You feel alone," she said, but her voice was all wrong. "You're not alone. You never are." And then the woman reached out a rubbery hand and cupped my face. Her fingers were like ice, but I was afraid to fight back. It felt like my teeth were vomiting, but I couldn't stop them as my fangs cut through my gums and exposed themselves to the world. I hated it and I was ashamed, because they reminded me of how far from normal I really was. "Welcome to the night," she whispered as my first tears fell. "Now," she continued, looking behind her, "there are several options for your father. Are you ready to find out who you really are?" I stared at the naked woman who had just killed my father, unable to pin down my emotions, still very confused that she could talk to me despite being dead. "What do you mean about options for my father?" I breathed, feeling like I was watching myself from above. "My daddy's dead, right?" The woman folded her pale arms. I could see the veins just under her skin. Spiderwebbing throughout her body like blue tree roots wrapped in rice paper. "Dead doesn't mean what people think, Danielle." Her voice sounded sticky like mud as she narrowed her eyes at me. "If a person's soul can birth into this world where there had previously been nothing, don't you realize that it can go somewhere else when nothing returns?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. It felt like my voice was coming from underwater. "Are you going to kill me now too?" She reached out and lifted my lips. Her fingers were cold, not ice cold, but more like a dead fish that hasn't quite started to sink. "You always knew what was hidden inside, didn't you? Even if you had never seen them, part of you knew what was there." I slid my tongue absently across the fangs that had erupted from my gums. The woman narrowed her cerulean eyes at me. "We don't kill our own." And then she bared her teeth. Two poisonous-looking fangs dripped from her gums, curving into serpentine points. "Come with me, Danielle. I will show you something different from what you've known, or what you thought was possible." I looked down on my father's crooked form. He hated bad posture, and it looked so wrong to see him so still, and my cheeks got hot as my head spun. And then the woman was holding my face close to hers. "There's yet time for me to accept a turn. I'll do it, but only if you ask, Danielle. What do you want for your father?" "We don't grow up all at once. It happens in fits and starts, and never when we're ready. Age can only change us when our spirit is no longer fit for the world that we knew." I tried to turn away, but she wouldn't let me. "Do what it takes to keep him here," I whispered. The woman stared at me harder, and it felt like she was scraping the back of my skull with her eyes. "Death is natural. What you're about to see isn't. What has been done can never be undone. Do you understand?" "No," I answered, my head slumping. "Oh, good." She let go of me. Anyone who answers yes to that question is insane. The woman turned around and paused while facing my dad, and then she slowly stepped toward him, her bare feet patting softly against the concrete floor. I felt guilty about the fact that there were only wrong choices before me. "Oh, what are you going to do?" I heaved, preparing to intervene. "Oh, stop asking questions to which you already know the answers, Danielle. You're 12 years old." My stomach burned like it did the time that I ate too many deviled eggs that had been sitting in the sun. I fell to my knees. The dead woman knelt as well, hovering over my dad, her fangs extending even lower as they elongated past her bottom lip. "Wait," I called out, but it was too late. We always like trying to stop things after it's too late, because that makes us feel like the world isn't what we make of it. Her fangs sunk deep into my daddy's neck with a splurge. The room felt like it was dancing from side to side as I held back the vomit. The dead woman pulled like she was sucking deeply from a straw. Her eyes rolled back as they bulged, turning into veiny orbs that protruded menacingly from her sunken white face. She rose up, lifting my dad's neck with her. His body shuddered, and then his skin turned a slightly darker tannish shade. Dad squeezed a fist, and then the woman released her mouth as Daddy fell to the ground and shook. Her eyes swiveled in their sockets before setting on me once more. She heaved, catching her breath while we stared at one another. "He might rise," she gasped. "He might not." Daddy's fist clenched again. "But we can't wait to find out." She stood and stepped across my father's body, reaching her hand toward me. I didn't take it. Will things ever be normal again? Now that she had blood in her system, the woman seemed capable of emotion. "I'm sorry, Danielle. This was always going to happen to you. The only question was the timing." I looked past her knees. "I want to see if Daddy wakes up." She bent down and took my hand by force. "No, you don't." I wouldn't have believed that I was going to leave my father behind, but my legs seemed to carry me on their own accord. I followed the woman in a daze as we left the mess on our floor, and she led me up the 19 steps of my family's basement for the last time. "You'll be 13 soon," she explained as we walked out of the back door and into the chilly night. "Old enough to know the truth." She squeezed my hand tighter. I pulled back. I want to go home, I protested. She turned sharply around to face me. Danielle, where do you think I'm taking you? Digging my heels into the grass, I tried to break free, but she was too strong, and it didn't matter how hard I clutched the ground. The woman floated up above me, legs hanging down as gravity released its hold on her. I wasn't ready to fly, but it was too late. She pulled my wrist after her, and my feet left the grass as my shoulders screamed in pain, the muscles stretching like taffy. As I rose into the air and flew past my childhood home into the night sky. The most shocking thing about flying was that it wasn't shocking at all. While the dead woman lifted above my backyard fence, pulling me behind her, the sensation felt natural. I watched as my shoes floated over the bushes as we floated into the night. I was afraid for my dad, and afraid of him. I didn't want him to be dead or undead or whatever the woman's bite had done to him. But every emotion climbed on top of itself as they screamed for my attention. They canceled themselves out, leaving me feeling completely numb as we all drifted. Can't you fly any higher? I asked her. I didn't want to look directly at the woman, because her naked and dead body had scared me. My hands were as cold as ice, far colder than any hand should be. No, she responded. I know you must have concerns, but you need to wait until we return to my congregation. Adults often answer questions by saying things that just raise more questions. Sometimes it's easier not to say anything in response and let a person feel like they're right. We floated through the night, and I felt like I was floating through it. The night became a physical presence, like water that I could drink or swim in. I was almost surprised when we stopped moving. We had landed in front of a large mansion with no lights on. We stood in thick, dewy grass that felt alive and dead at the same time. I thought about asking the woman if she was cold, but I suppose you don't care about a lot of things when you're dead. Let's go, Danielle, she whispered. The woman pulled my hand, which was still resting in hers. It's time for you to return home. A sudden jolt of fear ripped through my arm and stuck into my chest as I followed her forward. I didn't want to go in, but I couldn't think of any other option, so I obeyed. The house swallowed a noise. We walked up the front steps and through the door, and into a dark entryway with only the pale moon to guide us. Our footsteps made no sound as she led me around a hallway and to an open door. Light but no warmth radiated from the bottom of the staircase before us. Fear clutched my stomach and snaked up through my throat in the form of green nausea, as for the first time I tried to pull away. Her icy grip held firm. You need to do this, Danielle, she ordered. The woman moved down the first step, pulling me unwillingly after her. Each step felt worse. I knew that I didn't want to see what was at the bottom of the stairs, but I also knew that I didn't have a choice. I held my breath at the bottom before moving around the corner, telling myself that there was no way it could be as bad as I was setting it up in my mind. I was wrong. A ring of ghoulish-looking men and women huddled in a circle at the center of the stone-walled basement, each holding a flickering candle that made their pale skin look waxy. Several more candles sat throughout the room, providing the only source of light. Sitting in the middle of the group was a shirtless man kneeling on the floor, with his hands bound behind his back. His brown hair and beard splayed widely about his face. The man's head was bent forward, but he stared up with an angry defiance. Directly across from me, one pale man lifted his arms in greeting. Welcome, Danielle, to Amenity Falls. I'm so glad that you're finally where you belong. My stomach lurched as I stared at him. His voice was somehow low and high at the same time, sliding a discomforting kind of fear up my spine. His most unsettling feature, however, was his eyes. They were pink. I am Kadavru, he announced. We've been waiting a long time to meet you, Danielle. More than anyone, Brooke here has been anticipating your encounter. The bound man grunted but did not budge. The woman finally released me and stepped toward the group. We both understood that I wouldn't run away. You've done everything expected and more, Gita. Kadavru commended as one of the pale women placed a black robe around her, and then he turned to face me. We're looking forward to great things, Danielle. I wanted to cry, puke, and hide, but I couldn't do any of those things. At least 19 pairs of eyes stared at me, and I knew that they could fly up the 13 steps before I got anywhere near the door. Nothing to say, Kadavru pressed. Very well. Your actions will do the speaking for you. The crowd drew back at his words, extending the circle to the stone edges of the basement. Only the kneeling man in the center remained in place. Are you ready? Kadavru hissed, smiling in a way that made me unhappy. No, I finally announced to the room. I don't know what's going on, and I think I want to go home. You are home, Danielle, droned a pale woman from my right. She's correct, child, Kadavru pressed, his inexplicably pink eyes boring into me. You can't escape this. I wiped my eye. I can't escape what? I mumbled, not wanting to know the answer. Kadavru stared at me a moment longer before drawing a knife and approaching the kneeling man, Brooke, from behind. My breath stopped as he raised the knife and slashed. Brooke's arm burst forth as he leapt to his feet, the now severed rope falling to the floor. Kadavru backed away with a sinister smile. Brooke looked around wildly, like an animal trapped in a cage, at the people encircling him. I stepped back, pressing my arms against the cold stone wall. Brooke is the reason that Gita ended up in your father's basement. He's also the reason that she will never see her daughter again. Brooke whipped around to stare at Kadavru, looking ready to murder him. Danielle, the moment is right and the man is right. We're excited to share this with you. He grinned, lifting his arms. Welcome to your first kill. We're prohibited from experiencing certain things at age 12. Kids hate that fact. But when the strange man told me that it was time for my first kill, I finally understood that grating phrase, "You're not old enough yet," can make a lot of sense. Brooke turned around and scowled at Kadavru. This is why, he heaved. This is exactly why you're filth. Every one of you, he spat, is too cowardly to face me unless it's 20 to 1. And even then, you're afraid of me and send a little girl to do it. His breathing was very heavy. You're nothing but trash, and I'll happily give my life to keep good people from being poisoned by trash. That's why the world is better off without her daughter, he finished with a whisper, pointing at Gita. In the frozen silence that followed, the only movement was the torchlight dancing on the man's bare, sweaty chest. And then Gita screamed and ran toward him, her robes flowing behind as she bared her vicious fangs. What happened next was so quick that I had to replay it in my mind 3 times before I understood what had happened. Brooke leaned toward her before quickly drawing back as Gita opened her mouth. He leapt into an uppercut that plowed directly into her now exposed neck. The punch was powerful enough to lift her off the ground. His gut kick was waiting as she landed. Gita collapsed to the floor, struggling to breathe. You're a coward, Brooke yelled, pointing at Kadavru. He took several bold steps through the middle of the circle, closing the gap between them. And if I'm going to die here, it's going to be fighting against Bah! Kadavru grabbed Brooke by his neck and lifted the muscular man with a single arm. Brooke kicked frantically, but his boots were 2 feet off the ground. Kadavru inspected him with a curious look, as though he were holding a particularly interesting coin up to the light. I have no particular need for the two of us to spar, he explained in a calm voice. You would already be dead otherwise. He dropped Brooke to the ground with a sound like 10 melons falling at once. Brooke struggled to pull in air while failing to draw himself into a kneeling position. Nearby, Gita was on her hands and knees, staring in hate as she slowly regained her breath. A chill ran through me as I looked across at Kadavru, who stood over the group without any hint of emotion or movement. You're wasting your time in fighting the inevitable, Hunter, he explained in the same deep and controlled voice. You can resist what's foregone, or you can do what you've come here to do. Brooke rolled his head to face his enemy, and then Kadavru pulled something from inside his robes and dropped it to the stone floor with a clatter. One wooden stake, 19.13 inches, carved to your exact specifications, he explained. You can have it if you face the task for which you have been brought here. Electric chills flared in my hips, buzzing on my neck and back, before curling around my ears and settling in my head, as every face turned toward me. I snapped around to check the staircase, but 3 pale, robed figures moved to block it, and then I looked again to Brooke. He met my eyes, and it was enough to know that he hated me before he knew me. Fine, he announced, reaching for the stake without breaking his gaze. If you're vile enough to want me to murder your children, that's where I'll start. I wanted to cry. I wanted to explain that I wasn't one of them, that everyone clearly hated me equally, that it wasn't fair to pull me into a world filled with purposeless anger, where I had nothing to gain from winning a fight. But I understood the truth as Brooke rose to his feet, continuing to glare at me with hatred that I had no hope of understanding. Angry people cannot win fights by hardy people they oppose. Their only concept of victory is to destroy the faith of those who believe that conflicts can be resolved without pain. Please stop, I squeaked as the robed figures parted to give Brooke access to me. He looked down on me with joy. My breath hitched as I realized that he could choose to stop himself, but he simply wouldn't do so as long as he was alive. He raised the stake as he stepped in front of me. We all have pieces of ourselves that float around unused, like books high atop forgotten shelves, until the strangest turn of fate makes us pull them out and see what's inside. I felt another piece of me, a hidden Danielle, squirming to get free. Brooke reached for me with his left hand as he lifted his right one higher, and something snapped, and the inner Danielle jumped into my skin. My fangs erupted as I jumped at Brooke, suddenly confident and very angry as I focused on the hand coming toward me. I took it into my mouth and bit down in red fury, the hand bones snapping like little twigs as my teeth sunk deep into his meat. He flinched like a jolt of electricity had shot through him. The stake momentarily stopped. Now hurt, Brooke swung it again as I pulled deeply at the flavorful blood in his hand. He froze. I pulled again, drinking the essence of his life, and he dropped the stake to the ground as his eyes sunk into their sockets. I drank it again and his skin melted against his bones, his face not little more than a fleshy skull. Pulling one more time, I watched his skin turn ashen gray as his lips disappeared. His neck, now little more than deflated flesh, was unable to support a head that rolled back like rotten fruit. I released his hand and pulled my head back while pushing against his frail frame, now little more than a skeleton. I tossed the body lightly aside. It crashed to the floor with a weak clatter, the sound of tinkling teeth scattering to the edges of the dark room. I felt good. I felt alive. 19 sets of eyes gazed at me, but no one said a word. It was Kadavru who finally broke the silence, but he remained pressed against the wall as he spoke. "Little girl," he gasped, "what kind of monster are you?" Our sense of right and wrong is mostly determined by the passions of those who happen to be standing nearby. So as I gazed at the 19 sets of menacing eyes while I backed into a stone wall, I truly felt that I was the one in the wrong, even though I didn't understand why. "Why did you bring her here, Kadavru?" one of them asked in a terrified voice. "She doesn't belong with us." I didn't want them to see me cry. "She's crying," another called out. "She knows that she's a freak." "I don't," I whispered. "You're the ones who brought me." I pressed my back against the cold rock of the basement wall, trying to grab onto anything but coming up empty-handed. The crowd formed a semicircle around me so that I couldn't see them all at once, no matter how quickly I glanced in every direction. Their ghost-like faces were even more sinister in the dancing torchlight. "We're not safe with her around," another announced. A sob escaped my lips despite my best efforts to hold it back. I was the only one to be attacked. "She doesn't understand," a man's deep voice called out. "We can't explain it to someone who doesn't already believe us." And Gita had recovered from her attack and gotten to her feet, enjoying the crowd. She stepped to the middle of the semicircle and plucked something from the ground. It was the wooden stake that Brooke had used to attack me. "It sometimes can be difficult to do the right thing," she breathed, her knuckles flexing around the weapon. "But we need to keep our community safe." I nearly fell over as the images of the night flew through my mind. Gita's limp, alabaster body on my basement floor. Brooke dissolved into dust by my actions. My father somewhere between alive and dead, left behind as I was whisked away. "I didn't want any of this," I whimpered. "I'm only 12. "That just proves how dangerous she is," another man called out. Something broke inside of my mind just then. I had always believed that right and wrong were clear lines that any level-headed person could see if they chose to do so. In that moment, however, I realized that we all choose to imagine the boundary with whatever hindsight makes us most comfortable, and we see violence as a way of correcting the existence of those who prove that morality is retroactive. And I remembered that I had teeth. I looked up at Gita's twisted sneer as she gazed at me in unmitigated disgust. I felt her hate and I reflected it back. I had never learned how to pull my fangs out, but instinct guided me as I dropped them down and hissed. She let go of her stake and staggered back. Adrenaline flowed through me as I realized that I didn't have to hate myself as much as they hated me. I might even be able to run out of the basement if I could just get past the crowd. Turning to the steps leading out of this place, I gauged the strength of those who stood in my way. They all scurried aside before I could form another thought. They were afraid of me. I loved and hated myself for understanding this fact. That paradox mixed with the decision that I didn't want to make, but had to act on immediately. Racing up the stairs could save myself, but it would also require embracing the ugliness of believing that I was at my best when feeling like a living pestilence. The alternative was to let them hurt me, which has a hypnotic appeal when you're made to feel that our spirits are intrinsically disgusting. All of this was felt with emotions and no words. It would take years to articulate even to myself what I had experienced in that moment. I hated myself and I ran. Up the stairs, into the hall and out the front door and into the night. The frigid air wrapped me tight and I hadn't dressed for the occasion, and I was cold. I didn't understand what had happened, but I knew that I was alone. With no cell phone and no idea where I was, I wondered. I lost a lot of things that night, some all at once and others bit by bit as I traversed an unfamiliar city. I had always believed that life had strict boundaries and that certain lines could never be crossed. One of those false convictions was that somebody would always take care of me. But passing street after street in the unforgiving chill, it stripped that away. I cried. I was at the intersection of 19th and 13th when I decided that anyone who really cared about me would have been by my side while I was alone. And then I turned to the left and saw myself reflected in a store window. For the first time in hours, I smiled. It revealed two tiny fangs when I took the time to look hard enough. The sun was almost ready to peek over the gray sky morning when I finally recognized the street that I had been walking. Without thinking, I headed towards home. Every contradicting emotion ran through me at once. Above them all was a single thought. I had left my father behind on the floor. Shouldn't he treat me the same way? Anxiety swirled with adrenaline to curdle into nausea that settled deep in my stomach as I placed my hand on the back doorknob. I had last seen my father dead on the ground. Maybe. So much of this night had been driven by the fact that I had to make decisions about my life without understanding what was happening or why. I closed my eyes and reminded myself that one day I would be an adult, and I would never have to feel that way again. I opened the door and walked into the house. It was very still, like the place had been abandoned. Nervousness flowed through me as I stepped toward the basement door. It stood slightly ajar. Had we left it open, I couldn't remember. My hands were shaking as I reached out and opened it. The basement was quiet. Nausea grew with each step. Did I want to see my father's body? Or was I hoping to see him alive, even though he would be in a certain agony? I didn't know what to hope. I took the last step into the basement, and then I turned a corner, looked down at the blood-stained floor, and gasped. Imagine how a body looks when a victim dies in pain. Can you see the fear in their glazed eyes? The way their mouth is frozen in a wide-open, permanent scream as rigor mortis sets in. Their gnarled fingers forever locked in the last failed attempt to end their pain. Now imagine that person as someone that you loved. My father was still recognizable, but his body was far enough removed from normal that everything in the world felt off-kilter. It would have been better if he were marred beyond recognition, but the semi-familiarity made it so much worse, like I was listening to soothing and familiar music played out of tune in the wrong key. Daddy's eyes stared up at me from the basement floor. I remember staring at his skin and thinking that it was the color of paper, far beyond the hue of any normal tone. The look on his body's face was clear. He could see the end coming and he wanted to reach for it. All of the aspirations for the second half of his life were worth destroying if it meant stopping the pain. I couldn't put all of this into words when I was 12. The emotions were specific but beyond my ability to articulate. I can share them now because I've relived those moments daily in the years since, and I had to put the voice to the feelings if I wanted to keep my sanity. The image of my dead father broke something in my mind. Watching his corpse stand up sent that fissure into the deepest part of me, cracking my spirit and leaving it unfixable. "What happened, Danielle?" he whispered. His voice sounded like dust blowing over rice paper. "What did I lose?" I wanted to help him stand, but I was afraid of my corpse dad. So I tried as he slowly and feebly got to his feet, grasping the handrail for support as he looked around the basement with wide eyes. My throat was nearly too dry to speak. "You died, Daddy." He looked down at me, not in confusion or in anger but sadness. He stepped forward like Frankenstein's monster, and I recoiled in fear. He saw that he was scaring me, but he didn't know how to stop it. So we just stared at each other ashamed. "You didn't tell me the truth," I whispered. "Are you really my dad?" He was quiet for a long while. The tears forming at the edges of his eyes marked the first time that I had ever seen him cry. "I wasn't your dad when you were born, Danielle. I'm only your dad now if you let me." I didn't know what to say. "What am I?" He swayed on his feet. "Something I was taught all my life that I needed to hate." I nodded. It made sense because it was the opposite of everything that I had ever known, which is exactly how this entire night had been. My family is composed of hunters, and we've always hated vamps because they killed so many of the people that we loved. Our only response was to eradicate them. "Is that how they saw you?" My voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "I suppose I never really thought about it." He wobbled again. My dad's face was still paper white. "Your mom and I had a little girl before you were born. The vamps got to her at her first birthday party, January 9th, 13 years ago. It changed the way that I understand sadness, Danielle. Everything bad that had happened to me before losing my first daughter, pain as a concept had always been sadness that arose from hoping things might return to normal. But losing a child meant accepting that life simply can't be normal again. Ever. Pain doesn't work the same way afterward, because hope is dead." He wiped his eyes again. I noticed that they were turning pink. So I made a decision. We didn't speak for at least a minute. I could feel the quiet hanging thick between us, like heavy swamp moss that dangled in clumps from when Dad took us on a trip to Louisiana when I was 10. It was hard to breathe there too. I took a little girl from one of them. Figured that killing her was too easy. No, I was going to do worse, so much worse. I would raise her to be like me, to hunt them without mercy. When they saw one of their own turned, I knew they would finally be broken like I was. My insides felt like concrete. Dad cried harder. Two things happened. The first is that I discovered that the little girl wasn't a vamp like the rest of them. She didn't feed the same way, didn't have the same hunger. The congregation would hate her even more than our hunters, because she was an abomination in their eyes. The second is that the broken piece of me, the one that had stopped hoping, had shifted again. It didn't reset to the way things had once been. That's impossible. But the hate that had been burning for so long, that had kept me going forward. It wasn't satisfied, but just sort of ran out of fuel. I became a less efficient hunter, so I didn't fight as much. As a result, I wasn't with the rest of my gathering on the night that they were ambushed. I was taking care of my little girl while her mom was away. I think the other hunters chose that night because I would be gone, since I was losing my edge. Good thing I never told them my plan to raise a vamp, because they had solved the problem in their own way. He sighed. It was a hollow, ringing sound, like wind rushing through an abandoned home. When 4 of them died in a single night, I withdrew. I didn't hunt at all for a while, and I realized that I didn't miss it. Didn't miss the fire that had been burning me every day. I knew the truth had to come out eventually, and I knew that vamp and hunter alike would see my daughter as a target when that day came. But she was the best thing in my world, so I decided to live the best life we could with the time that we had left. He stopped talking and he looked at me. I stared right back. "So," he asked, his voice nearly caught in a sob, "what do we do now?" I stared at my father, neither alive nor dead, watching him sway on his feet. Our minds go to strange places in the most intense moments of our lives. I remember how drafty the basement was. I was tired but didn't want to sleep. A paint stain in the ground consumed my attention as I thought about the fact that it had always been there, but I had never taken the time to consider how it had come to be. "Danielle," Dad whispered. I looked up at his paper-white skin, marred only by 2 puncture marks in his neck where livid red blood sparkled beneath these sodium lights. I remembered a line from a play that my teacher had tried to explain to us. Too early seen unknown and known too late. After asking the class what it meant, and then receiving no response, she just looked sad and put her big red book away. She never mentioned it again. I think a lot of adults are like that. They want to share something very personal and special, but they spend their lives in silence, waiting for somebody to ask in just the right way. I don't know why I thought of that line, but it made sense for just a few seconds. "Danielle," he breathed again. "Do you hate me?" I didn't know what to say, and I know that my silence hurt him. He was just starting to cry when the window broke. Dad ran forward and yanked me away from the steps as we heard the upstairs window slide open. "Danielle," he hissed, "don't make a sound." Footsteps paced across the floor directly above our heads as a man stalked deliberately toward the basement door. I held my breath as I realized that there was no place to run or to hide. The basement was a dead end. Dad squeezed my shoulders with ice-cold hands. Slowly, the door at the top of the stairs opened. "Hello, Danielle," a gravelly voice called, and then he started walking down the steps. Dad pulled me back toward the far wall, moving himself in front of me as we watched a shadow emerge. It was a tall man with long, flowing brown hair. His teeth were very white when he smiled. He seemed like the sort of person who was happiest when he was angry. "True," Dad announced in a shaky voice. "It's been some time." True cocked his head at my father. "Yes, and now that we've caught up, we need to talk about Danielle." Dad's entire body froze. "How did you know?" "Our connection at the congregation felt that this was worth sharing," True answered dismissively. He flexed his fists, making the muscles in his chest look like they were about to tear through his tight black shirt. "You're far, far beyond sloppy at this point. Your failure endangers the rest of the gathering." He pulled out a long, thin, and wooden spike. "I came as quick as I could. You raised her as a human daughter. You shouldn't have to be the one to do it." Every skin cell felt like it was being burnt off my body. Until that night, I would have never thought my daddy was capable of killing anyone, let alone me. But as I looked back on what both of us had done in the past few hours, I realized that we're all strangers to each other, because we were all strangers to ourselves. "Essen," he pressed, addressing my father by name for the first time. "You shouldn't have to be the one to do it." True walked towards us, and then my dad stepped to the side, exposing me to the man who looked so happy to be so hateful. My head spun like a top. I didn't move because I had been so sure that my dad would protect me, because dads are supposed to keep their daughters safe. And I was so shaken by the abandonment that I couldn't think of a single way to react, other than freezing in place and waiting for him to hurt me. True's grip was like a metal clamp. I tried to move only when it was too late. His smile grew wider as he felt me struggle. Helplessness leads to panic and leads to helplessness, and the cycle is quick. I smacked his hand as hard as I could, but that just brought him more joy. "Do you know why our stakes are exactly 19.13 inches? It's a very important number," he asked, holding the pointed stick up to my face. I cried. His grip snapped away quickly as his hands grabbed a throat that had just split like the doughy skin of a dumpling. I was confused at first because I had never seen somebody's neck eaten while they were still alive, and I didn't know that my father had fangs. True fought back long after his body was no longer worth saving. Dad drank his blood like a thirsty athlete, gulping it down in disgusting swigs. And then he opened his mouth and released True, who bounced on the floor like a rag doll. Dad grabbed the wooden stake from the ground and plunged it into True's heart with a squelch. He gasped for breath. I stared down numb. "Dad?" I whispered. "Did I just grow up?" He looked up at me in shame, his hollow, ice-blue eyes animalistic. "Are you sad?" I tried to swallow, but my throat was too dry. "Sad and confused." He nodded. "The answer's yes, just a little bit." We waited in silence. "We're not safe here, are we?" I finally asked. "We're not safe anywhere, Danielle." He wiped the blood from his mouth and tears from his eyes. "I will be sorry for the rest of my life," he stood. The blood dripped from his chin. "So," he asked, his voice wary, "do you want to know the truth?" The air felt heavy in my lungs, like everything around me was grittier and always would be. "No," I answered. "I don't want to know the truth." I wiped my eyes. "But I have to now." Dad stepped toward me and wrapped me in a soft hug. It was the gentlest touch that I had felt from him since that horrible night began. He kissed the top of my head and pulled me in close. I hugged him back, but there was a great distance between us that I incoherently believed was temporary. "Growing up usually isn't fun," Dad said as he released me. "I suppose that's why parents hide it from their children for as long as they can." I stared around at the stark basement, the bright lights and the blood on the ground. "Oh, will we have to run away?" I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from another room. Dad wiped his eye. "Yeah," he folded his arms, "and I don't think I'll be able to go with you." My stomach turned cold. Like every organ, it changed to stone at that exact same time. Dad looked at me but didn't face me. "I achieved my first kill at 19, because I had been planning for it since I was 13. Danielle, when you believe in a cause, it has a way of becoming its own justification, even when that cause works against the things that led you to it in the first place." He shuffled his feet around at True's spreading blood. "Our gathering, that's the name for a group of vamp hunters, made a deal with a very dangerous man. He gave us information and money to help us hunt. It was never enough to give us what we wanted, but always just sufficient to get him what he needed. We took it because we believed that we were right." He wiped his other eye. "I convinced myself that he wasn't doing the exact same thing for the congregation. That's a group of vamps that we were hunting. I had to make myself think that, because I knew the truth would destroy my belief system, and I'd already hurt too many people to question whether I was wrong." He squatted next to True and rested his hand on the man's bloody brown hair. "Why was the dangerous man giving you money if he was tricking you?" Dad smiled, and I had never seen him look so sad. "That's the best way to control someone, Danielle." I didn't understand. "Who is he?" Dad slowly turned to face me. "Alistair Delora. Remember his name, Danielle, because he already knows yours." A finger of hot nausea tickled the back of my throat. Why would he care about knowing the little girl's name? Dad's lips drew thin as he stood. "It doesn't matter that you're a little girl. If you have something that he wants, then you're just an obstacle." He ran his fingers through thinning hair. "I always knew that, I always saw it, but I chose to pretend that I didn't. People who make those mistakes are rarely the ones to pay for them. I'm so sorry, Danielle." "So, let me get this straight." I shot back, my eyes suddenly molten hot. "The hunters want to hurt me because they think I'm a vamp. The vamps want to hurt me because they think that I'm not. And the dangerous man is coming for me because I'm in the middle." The heat spread across my face. I felt like I was melting from the inside out, and that everybody would be happier if I dissolved into nothing. In that moment, I was sure that the world wouldn't be at peace until I decided to stop loving myself. Dad turned paler. He handed me the bloody steak, which I took in shaking hands. I didn't want it, but I was sure that I had no choice. What will the bad man do if he finds me? Dad turned away. I don't know. I made a decision to remain ignorant. He folded his arms. There are more special people all over the world. The man is very interested in special women and girls. He swallowed. The hair on my neck stood at attention as I felt fingers curl around my ankle. I looked down to see that True was not quite dead. The stake was in his heart before I realized that I was bending over to attack him. I noticed that my fingers were coated in blood and that the wooden tip had disappeared into his chest, and that the grip on my ankle had slackened. Attacking him didn't feel unnatural. I decided that the world might be right. Perhaps it wouldn't be happy until I no longer loved myself, but I didn't owe happiness to the world. If taking as much for myself meant misery for others, then they deserved the rottenness that they wanted to spread. I lacked the ability to articulate any of this at age 12, but I understood it was true without the phrasing being necessary. Most people are afraid of arranging exact words in a perfect order, because we can only endure our own minds when shrouded in at least a little bit of mystery. I stood. What does he do with these special women and girls? I breathed, distantly shocked at how steady my own voice sounded. Dad got paler. They're brought to a place called the Harlequin Heaven. No one taken there ever leaves. That's all I know. I rubbed my fingers around the slick blood coating my fingertips. When are they coming for me? The sound of a car racing down the street swept into the basement, loud enough for us to feel the urgency in the driver's effort. Danielle, Dad snapped, grabbing my wrist. We have to run. I sprinted up the basement stairs without waiting for an explanation from my father. So many different people wanted to hurt me that it was safer to assume every stranger was an enemy. The van screeched to a halt just outside of our front door. The sound was loud enough to communicate exactly what was unfolding, even though I couldn't see it. A heavy man leapt onto the sidewalk and raced toward the house, and the only way out of the basement was moving upward and closer to the front door. Have you ever been forced to run from danger by running toward it? Our survival instinct stretches and cracks in those moments, pushed and pulled by contradictory messages between our higher and lower brains. But I knew that moving too slowly would be a final mistake, so I sprinted to the top of the stairs and pushed open the door. A thin, pale man was waiting for me. Danielle, he whispered as the man outside slammed against the front door. Please, I gasped. Please move. There's a man who wants to hurt me. There are many men who want to hurt you, he answered in a steady voice. The front door slammed again as the thin man reached for me. Dad shoved me hard against the wall and tackled the pale man as the front door burst open. The two of them rolled on the floor, each bearing a vicious-looking set of fangs. They stopped with Dad on the bottom, his enemy's hands wrapped around his neck. What did you think those teeth would do, Wesson? The pale man smiled as he stepped behind him. You can't hurt me with a bite, but I can make you suffer by squeezing a throat that will never die. He hissed as he grabbed Dad's neck even tighter, his face turning bright red. Dad made silent eye contact with me as the pale man continued talking. You can't see more than one step ahead, Essen, and that's why your daughter won't. Dad burst forward and knocked the pale man onto the stake that I had pointed against his back. The weapon ripped through his chest with a splurge that seemed to surprise him more than anything else. Blood gushing down his chest. The pale man looked back at me in confusion before rolling off my father. Dad gasped for breath as the other man walked into the kitchen. He seemed 9 feet tall and bearded and thick, more animal than human. My survival instinct kicked into high gear. I knew that he was here to take me to the man that Dad had warned me about, and that I would have been safer if we had just let the vamp kill me. Understanding hit me in an instant. Both a hunter and a vamp had appeared minutes apart from each other and alone. Such an arrangement meant that they wouldn't fight one another, and they wouldn't have the numbers to take me. But it would be just enough to slow us down so that this towering behemoth could have his way in the end. They had been sacrificed by a man who knew how to use his pawns. Time ticked sideways. I looked down from the stranger to my father, and I understood what was about to happen. I knew that he would overpower the two of us even with our fangs, and that this fight was over before it began. "I know what's in room 1913, SN," the large man said. Dad closed his eyes and took a long breath before looking at me. For a few moments, every sound ceased except for my father's voice. He stared up from the floor, eyes bloodshot and face still red, too exhausted to cry. "Danielle, if you've ever loved me, don't stop running." He sprang to his feet and lunged at the enormous man. Dad's face met a plate-sized fist that knocked him to his knees. Dad couldn't win this fight, but if he fought to the end, it would be enough to give me a 30-second head start. Would you run away? I thought that I would need a long time to consider, but it turns out that we really know the answers to even the most painful questions. It just takes time to admit them. I turned and sprinted toward the back door, bursting through it as Dad screamed. I ran until my lungs burned and my veins pumped battery acid, and I didn't stop for a very long time. I knew that the world could hurt me because I could hurt it right back, and I could look at that fact from any angle that I chose. I never saw my father again. I knew it even then, but wouldn't believe it for a long time. The large man, however, would reappear several times in my life. I was a freak, but everybody's a freak from someone else's perspective, and feeling normal is just a lack of self-awareness. Tears flowed freely as I raced into the night. This was Dad's fault. All parents fail their children in ways that will follow them forever. I suppose that's the only reason we can beg forgiveness from our own children. My ugliness kept me alive by hurting anyone who felt normal through hating me, and each encounter pulled back more of the veil. I figured it didn't make much sense to hate myself, and so many other people were handling that particular task. So I felt the difference flow through me as I lifted my legs higher and higher, moving away from everyone who believed that I was wrong from birth, and reached. Soon my feet weren't even touching the ground, and I stopped pumping them altogether as I floated higher and higher into the night. Let me cut to the chase and just catch you up on what's happened so far. This house is freaking haunted. I don't know how the heck anyone has managed to sleep at night here and call themselves a human being. We moved in just last Monday and I knew something was up. I've always had a sixth sense about this sort of thing. One time, my wife and I spent an anniversary at a hotel, and we had to change rooms 4 times because I felt something was wrong with each suite that we stayed in. And it turned out that I was right. Either a murder or some weird scandal had happened in each one of them. And this property was no different, but didn't really have a choice in the matter. I won't go into too many details, but our finances have been very tight lately, so this was all that we could afford. Anyway, back to the ghost thing. Our youngest, Callie, is the one that first had an encounter. That was Wednesday. She said that someone was in her attic, but we told her that there is no attic. "Well, I hear someone walk around to my ceiling then," she snapped. I decided to take her word for it and check. And wouldn't you know it, there was some residue from a shoe on the ceiling. How the heck it got there, I don't know, but I was convinced that something was wrong, especially because of what happened next. My children had nightmares about the basement before it was unlocked. When we got to the property, we were told there was a wine cellar. Nothing out of the ordinary, and actually it sounded like something that we had always wanted. There was a lock on the door which the real estate agent admitted they didn't have a key for. I'm sure if you use something strong, you can get it open though. Just no one has ever really had much use for the space down there, they said. I knew something was off and I could feel it. My skin was crawling as I looked down toward the basement door. There were about 4 steps that jutted downward and that ended abruptly in a short hovel. The door looked old, probably older than the house itself. It did not look pleasant or friendly. It looked like it was meant to stay locked. My wife was immediately intrigued by it though. I bet there is some great Sangio or Syra down there. I can borrow my dad's drill and get that open in no time, she told me. I had a bad feeling, especially when both Callie and Adrian had dreams about the basement. Adrian was first. He had always had an avid imagination. After Callie had reported that she was sure people were walking in the ceiling, he couldn't sleep and he came to bed with us. That resulted in a night where no one got any rest because he kept waking up screaming. What has gotten into you? I asked him. I keep hearing something under the floor. It's getting into my skin, he would tell me frantically. He said that there was something that was growing under the house. In one dream, it was a weed. The next, it was an octopus. Either way, it was unsettling. He had never had strange dreams like this before. But still, my wife was now even more curious because of the nightmares. If there is something about the basement, I want to know what it is, she decided. Audrey had always been a bit stubborn. I told her to leave it alone. My hope was that maybe if we ignored the otherworldly presence in our house, it would get tired and move on. That didn't happen. Something in the basement doesn't want us to leave. It was Saturday when Audrey finally found the way to open the door. I didn't even know that she had gotten the drill. I had to go to work that day, and by the time that I had gotten home, she was already in the basement. I remember walking in and announcing to the kids that I was home. A normal Saturday afternoon would mean that they were either playing outside or on their Xbox. But this time, the house was empty and quiet. I immediately felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as my first thought went to the basement. Sure enough, I saw that the door was slightly ajar, but I couldn't see anything beyond the 4th step. It seemed like it plunged straight into darkness. I was just about to walk down there and see if she was maybe sorting through whatever might be below when I had second thoughts. That sense of foreboding overwhelmed my body, and instead, I decided to call her cell phone. I heard it ringing below my feet, and then I heard Adrian make a giggle from the stairs, and I turned toward the basement door and called out to them. Hey, don't scare me like that, I shouted. No response. It made me uneasy. I tried to call again, and it rang, and still she didn't respond. Adrian, tell your mom to come up, and you too. Where is Callie? I asked. We're all down here, he responded. Something in his voice was off. It was chilling. Okay, well, are you coming up then? I asked. No. A short and succinct answer. Something was wrong. Adrian, listen, I need you to come upstairs. Why don't you come downstairs, Father? He asked. That didn't sound like my son at all. I looked down into the stairwell and saw 2 glowing orbs which I assume were his eyes. I couldn't see his pupils, just those white circles. I tried my best to not be frightened as I spoke. How long have you been down there? I asked. Long enough, he responded. I took a tentative step toward him. You really need to come up now. All of you, it's not safe down there. He smiled and I could see his teeth. It made the rest of his shadowy face look inhuman. "Are you sure it's safe up there?" he whispered. I didn't take any more steps toward him. I knew this was wrong. I felt cold talking to him, like it was just an empty void. That was Saturday, and I waited an hour before I was sure that they weren't coming back up. And then I tried again and told them to come up, and got the same response except this time from my daughter. "Daddy, I like it down here. You will too," she said in a hum. I hardly slept that night because I was so worried about my family. I didn't know who to call or what to do. It's not like the police were going to come over for something like this. I kept hearing scratching on the floor and it would keep me awake. I've never felt so watched as I stayed in bed, like there were eyes in the floor below. And then Sunday came and I went to work, trying desperately to ignore the sense of dread building inside of me. I would get text messages from my wife every so often. "When are you coming home? The kids miss you." "I miss you too, of course. We need to be a family together. We have to stay together as a family." That prompted me to respond, "Then stop this foolishness and come upstairs. It's you who is being the fool here, John." I decided to stop reading the text messages after that. When I got home, the house was quiet again, and I didn't even go near the stairs. I grabbed some sleeping meds and locked myself in my bedroom, hoping that the night would pass quickly. Now it's Tuesday, and things have progressed worse. A lot worse. "We're hungry, Daddy. Can you please come feed us?" Callie whispered to me as I passed these stairs this morning. I called a few people in the area, spiritual leaders and such, hoping maybe they could give advice. As you might imagine, no one wanted to talk to me. They thought I was crazy. Maybe I am. I didn't think it would be possible for something so simple to be so sinister, but it is. And I'm terrified because I don't want anything harmful to happen to my family. "Why don't you come up and eat, baby?" I asked my girl. "We can't. It won't let us leave." As if I didn't already have confirmation that something was happening down there, but this sent shivers across my spine. "And you can't leave either," my wife added. I saw all three of them there, 3 pairs of eyes in the darkness staring up at me. "Just come down here," Audrey insisted. I took a step toward them, my heart racing. Something was compelling me to go deeper. Take one more step. "Just do it, John, just do it." And then I heard this low growl as I had reached for the door. It was like the whole house settling and preparing to swallow me whole. I slammed the door and caught my breath, refusing to go a step further. For a moment, there was silence, and then I heard a soft noise on the other side of the door. A tapping. I ignored it at first, but it continued. I bit my lip and whispered, "Who's there?" There was a giggle mixed with that hellish growl. "Daddy, it's me. Please open the door. Pretty please." I really wanted to just break down and cry after what happened yesterday because I was about 90% sure that my family was gone. They went into the dark basement below and they even refused to come back upstairs since Saturday. I've tried everything to see what is down there, flashlights, lanterns, but I haven't gone past the door. I can sense an evil there, and I know that it's taken them. In fact, I was so upset that I did something I probably shouldn't have, but in a way, it's gotten the ball rolling toward some answers. Full disclosure, some alcohol was involved in the decision-making. After a few drinks, I called the one person I thought might have answers to all this mess, the real estate agent. Truth be told, I felt ashamed that I didn't think of it sooner. But another reason I wanted to call is because my patience was gone. I demanded an answer when she finally answered the phone. John, you need to slow down. You aren't making sense. she stuttered. Something in her voice told me that she freaking knew, and I was too drunk to care about her to let it slide. You need to get over here and explain the heck I need to do to help my family, I demanded. All right. I'll be there in a couple of hours. I sat at the kitchen table, fidgety and afraid. Every so often, I would hear the pitter-patter of bare feet below me, the sound of my children supposedly playing in the basement. Every time that I heard them laugh or giggle, I nearly lost it. In fact, right before the agent came, I was in a really drunken stupor and I started to yell down at the basement, demanding it to respond. I don't know what you want from me, but you need to let my family go. We haven't done anything to you. Do you hear me? I screamed. Of course, the basement didn't respond. It was unnaturally quiet, in fact. And that just made me even more upset. I stumbled down the steps to the door and slammed my fist against it. What do you want? I shouted louder. This time, I heard a low scratching noise, and I nearly jolted from the step, as I saw some strange lettering burning into the door from the other side. It took a moment for the word to form, singed into the old wood permanently, like a scar as it made me literally gasp for air. And then the doorbell rang. The real estate agent was there. I fumbled back upstairs and went to the front door, glaring at her. About freaking time, I responded as she came in. John, you've been drinking. What the heck is going on? Where's your wife? She asked nervously. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you. They've been in the basement and now they won't come up, I explained. She walked over to the stairs and looked down at the door, commenting, I see that you managed to take the lock off. So, what was down there anyway? I haven't gone down, I admitted. She gave me a puzzled look. What is that on the door? She walked toward it to get a good look and then asked me, John, did you do this? No, how could I asked. She tried the handle, but it didn't budge. The door was stuck shut. And you're telling me that Audrey and the kids are down there? How long have they been down there? She asked as she giggled the handle with no lock. I fidgeted with my feet, feeling ashamed and embarrassed and frightened all at once. About 4 days now. Her eyes widened in alarm as she pulled out her phone and announced, I'm calling the cops, John. This is unacceptable. It's negligence. You should have called the fire department by now. How the heck are they getting food and resources down there? She pushed me aside and walked back to the kitchen as she dialed 911. And then I heard this low rumble below our feet and a noise from one of the bedrooms. What was that? The real estate agent asked. And then, as she was talking to the operator, a shadow appeared from the doorway and I felt immediately cold and empty inside. Standing there in the hallway was my wife, or at least something that looked exactly like my wife. Oh, thank God, the agent said and added to the operator that it was a false alarm. Is everything all right? Audrey asked softly. I was at a loss for words, watching as my wife walked into the kitchen and stood alongside the sink. The agent slid her phone back into her pocket and gave me the stink eye. It would seem that your husband here had the idea that you and your children were in danger. Honestly, I'm hoping all of this was a great prank at my expense, she commented dryly. Audrey laughed. It didn't sound like her laugh. I kept still as the agent walked over to her and added, After this little scare you gave me, I think I deserve a drink. You did say you got wine from the cellar, correct? I can get you something, Audrey answered, walking to the fridge. So, what is it that my husband told you was wrong? She asked casually. You and the kids were locked downstairs, or something in the basement. Audrey, I heard you down there, I said softly. She poured the wine and smiled at me. It was not the friendly look that I knew from her. Well, I'm clearly not in the basement now, am I? And you believe that nonsense? She asked the agent, passing her the wine. She sipped it and chuckled softly. Well, to be honest, I've heard a few rumors about this property. It's been somewhat difficult to sell. So, the stories sounded outlandish, but I guess I let my imagination get the best of me. Rumors, I said, keeping an eye on Audrey. She was watching the agent the way a lion stalks their prey. Where are the children anyway? Our guest asked. Excuse me, Audrey said, seeming surprised by the question. I really should be going, but before I do, can I at least confirm the children are right? The agent said. Oh, yes, of course, Audrey said, fumbling for something. I saw it just as her fingers curled around the handle, and I made a noise. Watch out! But it was too late. She twisted the knife and slammed it straight into the agent's face. The woman screamed, dropping the wine glass, and immediately scrambled to defend herself. But Audrey was faster. She grabbed the woman's hair and slammed her into the sink, forcing her under as she started the water. Audrey, you're going to suffocate her. I screamed as I tried to pull her off. She pushed me away and then turned on the garbage disposal, a grinding noise filling the air, as I heard the woman scream louder and blood began to splatter out in every direction. My wife didn't even blink as she kept the woman's face down until her body had gone limp. Finally, when she was sure that the real estate agent was dead, she lifted her from the garbage disposal and tossed her to the floor. I did my best to not look at her mangled face. And then she dragged the body toward the basement stairs. Audrey, talk to me. What the heck are you doing? Talk to me, I said, trying to stop her. She made a hissing noise and pushed me away from the stairs as she walked down and pushed the door open to the sheer darkness below. I tried again to stop her, and she scratched me across the face, slamming me against the wall as she dragged the body down the stairs to the basement. I listened as I heard the noise of bones breaking and growls from predators fighting over a fresh meal. It sounded so primal, so animalistic. Then, from the darkness, Audrey stepped out and closed the door, looking down at her blood-splattered clothes. What have you done? I whispered, barely able to find my voice. I was in fear of what she might do to me if I got in her way. She blinked, looking confused and surprised by my question. The children were hungry. I clenched my fist. Those things down there aren't our kids. I looked at her with hate and anger. And you are not my wife. She made a low hiss. That's no way to talk to me, John. And I would be careful what you think you're going to do next. Ask yourself carefully, how many people are going to get hurt because of your stubbornness? Audrey snarled. The police will come. They're going to eventually realize that poor woman went missing. What do you want from me? She turned toward the door and opened it back before snarling. I'm not staying up here to argue. I'm going back to be with our family, where you belong to, John. Don't you walk away, I screamed louder. I was shaking, convinced she would kill me in a second if she could. She turned her head and gave me a curious look. The house already told you what it needs. I suggest you start listening to it. And then she disappeared into the darkness and shut the door between us. I went to the door, struggling to get it open again, but it would not budge. I screamed in frustration as I touched the burnt letters. Crap, I'm such a wreck that I forgot to mention what the message was. More, it said. This house wants more, and I think I just gave it exactly what it needed. I won't be mincing words. I believe my family is gone. I know it and you know it. We all know that they have got to be dead. But that doesn't mean whatever the heck this thing is that took them is going to win. It's been nearly 5 days now. I lost my family over the weekend, and now I see that this house has a force of evil that I wasn't prepared for, that I don't think anyone was prepared for. But I'm going to keep fighting. My family deserves that. After my experience with Audrey, I decided to try to get the police again. A woman had just been killed in her house, and she had fed the corpse to the basement. I figured if that didn't pique their interest, the sheer amount of rat on the property would. I recognize that the entity I'm battling doesn't want me to seek outside help, so I probably should have anticipated that my phone wouldn't work on the property. Instead, I drove down to the police station to provide a statement. I had no idea what sort of tricks the entity would play while I was gone, but I also felt so relieved to get out. Guiltily, part of me wanted to keep driving, but no, Audrey and the kids needed me to finish this. I didn't tell them the full story, but just enough to convince them that an accident had occurred at my house and they needed to come investigate. One officer said something interesting just as we were about to leave. "What was the address again?" he muttered. I told him. Wasn't that the place they found that kid a few years back, Tommy?" "What kid?" his partner asked as we walked out of the station. "I can't remember. The husband was a bad guy and he kept the kid locked up in the basement for a few years though. And then afterward, the wife went insane and killed the son and the daughter. It was crazy," he said. "Oh, I remember that now," the other officer said. And then the rest of the ride became weirdly quiet. I tucked that little bit of info away into my brain as we drove to my house, and I prepared for whatever the house was going to throw at me next. Something told me that this man and his family had not made it out of the house alive, and I didn't want to be next. Honestly, I thought that I was prepared for anything by this point, but the house proved me wrong again. As we got inside, I directed them to the kitchen, only to find it was completely clean from top to bottom. Not a speck of blood anywhere or any body tissue. "Is this some kind of sick joke, son?" the second officer asked as he came back from checking the rest of the house. "No, it's true. Here, let me get you the real estate agent's business card," I stammered as I fumbled through my wallet. "What's in the basement?" the other asked, looking down at the closed door. I don't really know," I admitted. "You got the key?" he asked. "It isn't locked," I said. "Well then, lead the way," the second officer told me. I froze. I couldn't think of a good excuse to not go down into the basement, but every bone in my body told me something horrible would await us. "I would really rather not," I said nervously. And then one officer sighed and pushed me down, muttering that he didn't have time for this nonsense. And they both flanked me to prevent me from going back upstairs, and I reached for the door, hoping to God that it was locked. It opened with a slow creaking sound, and I gestured toward the darkness. "I don't believe there's any electricity down here," I admitted. "Where exactly is your family, sir?" one officer asked as they took out their smartphone to shine a light down at the basement stairs. I could just barely make out a brick wall. It was that dark. They aren't here. The wife took my kids to visit mom upstate for the week," I lied. I really don't know why. I knew that it was a mistake for the moment I did, but it was too late. "Daddy?" a voice whispered from down below, and I closed my eyes and prayed the officers didn't hear it. Of course they did. What was that? Before I knew what was happening, the two men were taking me down the stairs to the edge of the basement. We couldn't see anything down there. Even the light was hardly penetrating the shadows. But then amid the gloom, we saw my little girl, standing amid a pile of what looked like human waste. And I suddenly realized she was shackled to the wall. "Holy God," one officer exclaimed, running toward her. "No, it isn't safe," I shouted. "Get back against the wall," the second officer snarled. pushing me away even as his partner knelt to check on Callie for injuries. I could see her mouth was still dripping with blood. "That's what I was trying to tell you. They attacked that woman." I insisted, but the two cops were no longer listening to me. "Are you okay, sweetie?" the officer asked. "That isn't my daughter," I said frantically. "You better shut up before I make you regret anything else," the second cop snarled. "Daddy, I'm scared," Callie said as she cried softly. It sounded so much like my little girl, I wanted to believe. "Leave her alone." A scream came from the darkness. The officer that was helping Callie jumped in surprise, turning to see faux Audrey standing there in the gloomy basement. There was hardly enough lighting to make out her face, but I could see that portions of her skin were beginning to peel away, around her nose and eyes. Beneath it, her skin looked like porcelain, new and young and different, almost the way an insect might break out of a husk. "They aren't ready," faux Audrey said as she stepped closer. I recognized now that my initial guess was right. She looked like a new person, with dark red hair and paler skin. Not the woman that I had married at all. Not even close. "Ma'am, we're going to need to question you and your husband," the officer said sternly. "He's not my husband," she said, confirming my fears. The house had changed her, but into what? Before the officer had a chance to move, the stranger said, "They aren't my children either. Not yet." "What is going on here?" the other officer asked. "I don't really care. All of you are going to come down to the station and clear this up immediately," the first man insisted. "No, you can't take them. The house needs them," she snarled, blocking the stairway. "Lady, if you don't move right now, I'll tase you," the second officer snapped. I watched as the stranger's eyes turned completely black, and then the entire house rumbled again. "What in the world?" the cop said, looking down at his feet. I watched in shock and horror as his legs became bolted to the floor, transforming into wood. He struggled to move as the strange shape-shifting magic moved up his body, and he started to scream in terror as it covered his body. Before he had a chance, he was as stiff as stone, immobile. The second man was no different, frantically running up the stairs, only to have them act as quicksand and begin to swallow him alive. He turned and tried to shoot the stranger, but it didn't do any good. Whatever had emerged from my wife's body was unfazed by the attack. As soon as he was gone, she turned her attention to Callie and smiled in the most sinister way. "Nothing will prevent our return, our survival," she whispered. "Daddy, I want to go. Please help me," she whispered. I looked at the tears in her eyes and then looked toward the stranger, mortified as I realized that I was wrong about all of my family being gone. "Callie, Daddy's going to save you, I promise," I said, reaching for her hand. "She belongs to the house now, John. Audrey tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen," the woman hissed as she blocked my path to my daughter. "Man, you just took two men's lives. How the heck are you going to explain that one away? This house will be torched to the ground once locals know that it's haunted." I snapped back, my voice shaking in fear and anger. "The house will keep them away. It has already grown stronger. Soon, it will be able to make things right," she whispered. "I want my family back. They didn't hurt you," I told the demon. Her eyes blazed with fire. "But the family before you did. A price must be paid. We will walk this earth again and you will help us, or you will never save the ones you love," the stranger told me. I realized in its old cold, calculating way, the demon that had taken my wife hostage and formed her body to suit its needs was now offering me a choice. I could harvest souls for it, to save my children. "Where is Adrian? Show me my son before I make any deal," I said. She stepped aside, and in the darkness, I saw his weak, frail body. He was hardly conscious. A thick layer of some kind of strange plaster was covering his skin, and he was struggling to breathe. Seeing him there made me want to scream, to cry, to kill this monster. But I knew I couldn't if I wanted to even get a chance to save my kids. "I'll do it," I whispered as my lips trembled. "I'll gather the souls you need, but you have to let my children go. I've run out of options. I hate this house. I'm so frustrated about everything. Today marks it being 6 days since my family was taken hostage by a demonic entity in the basement. After 3 days, I came online to discuss my problem and get some advice. I guess I really felt I was losing my mind, considering that after the initial incident, my wife killed our real estate agent and then 2 police officers were swallowed up by the house. My hope had been to make others see what is happening here, but the evil is stronger than I realized. I feel like it's manipulating me and holding me and my children hostage. I guess you could say that I'm mad, especially because I agreed to go out and bring more souls for the demon in exchange for my children's safety. Yes, Adrian and Callie are alive, for now, but the house is hungry. The stranger that emerged from my wife's husk explained to me, and I don't understand it, but this is what she said. I'm still reeling from the fact that my wife is likely gone forever, used as a shell for this new life form that is somehow able to communicate with the house. The real estate woman was a sinful body. I force-fed your children because if I don't feed them, the house will simply consume them. Audrey did that to keep them alive, John. She was doing what was necessary to keep them alive, unlike you. I ignored the jab and said, "So the house must be fed sinless and innocent souls. Is that it?" "Yes, and you must hurry, John. Otherwise, I can't stop the house from feeding on them, and they will be lost forever." Some part of me told me that my wife's spirit was the one also making this deal with the devil. She knew that she was doomed, but wanted to do everything in her power to save our kids. It's my duty to do the same. I left the house that morning, promising to return in only a few hours. I know some of you have suggested that I simply leave, but what good would it do? This thing would find a way to hurt others, and I would lose what little life in me I have left if I knew I willingly left my children. I've been a coward, and it's time to start thinking of a way to defeat this evil. As I got further from the house, my head began to clear and I considered what I knew so far. Something had happened here before we had moved in, something that likely killed the family that had lived there. So that must mean that there is a record of it somewhere. I managed to find the local newspaper archives downtown and requested a snoop. Thankfully, the woman at the desk didn't ask any questions, and soon I found myself going down a proverbial rabbit hole. It took longer than I had anticipated, but I found 2 entries about the address, one only 2 years back. Mother attacks both children and then herself, in a tragedy that rivals the original. That got me digging a little deeper, and I soon found in the other article that one of her children was apparently adopted, and the son of a man that also claimed to have been attacked by spirits at another house over 8 years ago. A woman adopts son of heinous criminal in shocking end to a dangerous case. The article explained that she said her husband was charged with taking the boy, but the original biological father was still in county lockup. I did a search in him next and found an interview where he was attempting to warn others about an entity that had made him attack his son years ago. There was evil there that I couldn't explain. It was compelling me to do things that I didn't want to do. The house was alive, and it took my son, and I know that it will want to feed again. You must destroy it. It made me wonder if it was even possible to destroy this evil. Where did it come from? I knew my next stop would be the county jail, to talk to this estranged father. I checked my watch, nervous and afraid that the demon would think I was taking too long. I needed to buy some time somehow. The only solution I could come up with was to swing by a local church and convince a pastor to stop by for a baptism. "And you said it's your children that need to be baptized?" the older man asked as I drove him to the house. I figured a man of God would be the closest thing to sinless that I could find, and maybe if I got lucky, he could even help defeat this evil. I drove back to the house trying to fend off any questions that the pastor had, a sense of dread overwhelming me as I got in and headed straight for the basement. "There is something evil about this house," he said as he entered, and then he paused at the top of the stairs. "I know this place. People died here," he whispered. I froze and looked down, wondering if the house might attack because of the man's realizing its true intent. "Your children don't need to be given the water of God, but His Spirit. Take me to them immediately," the pastor insisted. I couldn't even see the basement floor. We walked together and toward the wall, my mind reeling as I wondered if this man would even stand a chance against this evil. It wasn't the darkness that scared me now, but what was happening down below that sent a shiver down my spine. When I got down there, I saw to my surprise that the faux Audrey, the stranger, was sleeping. She was in a fetal position in the corner, almost like an insect going inside its shell again, and it made me wonder if I had the chance to rescue my children. Adrian was hardly moving, pale as a sheet and covered in the same goop as before, and Callie was actually asleep as well. Was the house working its magic on them to change them the way that it had Audrey? "The demon is weakened. Some time ago, I can feel its pain, its anger. It's in the floorboards, the walls, the entire house," the pastor realized. "What happened here?" he whispered, not knowing the full story. "Father, that doesn't matter. We have to work quickly to save them," I said as I began to work in the locks. He went to check my son, hardly able to get him to move. Callie's eyes shot open. "What are you doing?" she asked in a groggy voice. "I'm getting you out of here. We're leaving, Callie. I'm going to save you," I responded. And then she kicked at me and started to scream. "Don't touch me! Get away! Get away!" She kicked at me, and I frantically looked across the room to see Adrian was now standing up, looking almost dead to the world. He was grabbing the pastor by the throat and crushing the man's windpipe. "You've taken too long, John. Your daughter is gone." His voice almost completely monotone. "No, no, please God, no," I said as I managed to break the lock and grab her hand. "Callie, come with me," I shouted as we moved toward the door. "No," Callie screamed. Then the pastor tugged at his cross on his collar and showed it to Adrian. He hissed in pain and dropped him, and then the man shouted, "Run!" I obeyed and booked it up the stairs, the house rumbling and shaking as I did. As I made it to the ground floor, Callie tugged at me and finally pulled away. "I don't know you, stop," she screamed. And then I looked at her and realized that her eyes had changed color. I hadn't seen it in the darkness, but her hair had too. This wasn't my little girl. The house shook again, and I turned to see the stranger push herself up from the floorboard, her naked and monstrous body snarling as I looked on in horror. "You dare go against our arrangement," it snarled. No, I brought what you asked for," I said desperately. "You tried to attack us, and for that you must suffer." The stranger snarled louder. "John," I heard the pastor said as he managed to make it to the first floor. "It's not too late for your family. You must undo the sins that have been committed here," he begged. "Silence!" These strangers screamed louder and then made the girl become her puppet, her hands fidgeting as if pulling the strings and forcing the child to comply. I watched as the little girl screamed and opened her mouth in pain, and then hornets began to swarm from her mouth. I was pushed to the floor by the sheer force of them, watching as they moved toward the pastor, stinging him madly with the fury of a legion of demons. They were going to kill him before he could have a chance. and it was giving me a chance to escape. I crawled toward the door as I heard the child screaming louder, and I felt my heart drop as I managed to push my way out to the front yard. I had to abandon my children there. The house had officially claimed them as its own. As I managed to escape and heard the buzz of the hornets grow louder, I made up my mind that there was only one thing I could do now. This place needs to be destroyed. It has taken everything from me, and I'll be damned if I don't make it pay. It's been a very long week. Last Saturday, my wife Audrey and my 2 children were taken hostage by a demonic force in the basement. I learned very quickly that Audrey was gone, but if I played nice with the demon, that I could save my kids. I didn't play nice and it took them from me, along with a good pastor that didn't deserve to die. Now, nothing was left except for me to try and destroy the house. I knew that it wouldn't be easy. It's been clear to me this entity has great power with the ability to control people's minds and take their bodies as its host. And I knew I would need help. So I went to the one person that I thought might even consider helping, the man that owned his house 8 years ago. After the incident 2 years back where it was discovered that his son was saved by the family that lived at a similar house to mine, I learned that he was cleared of all charges. That isn't to say his life was better though, because I soon discovered that he was at a local psychiatric hospital under careful watch. Apparently over the past 2 years, he had tried to end it several times. I don't blame him. I feel like I'm in the same boat if I'm being honest. The demon within this house has used me the same way it did him. I found him in the commons room, staring out the window down at the grass. He looked like a broken and defeated man, with no sense of purpose anymore. I was about to give him a reason to live again, even if it was for pure revenge. "Noah Hunt?" I asked, extending my hand to shake his. He ignored the gesture. "Who the heck are you?" he snapped back. "John, there's no way to make this easy, so I'll just say it. I think I'm dealing with the same demon you fought 8 years ago." Noah's eye twitched. I could see that he was scared, but he could tell also that I wasn't lying. "So then, it's starting again," he whispered. I had hoped when I told that woman the truth about what had happened to Jasper. I thought when I saw the reports that she killed them both that it meant it was over. He shook his head and tried not to let his hands shake and tremble. "But that was just the demon warming up, wasn't it?" "No, I think she really did go insane and kill them both. It weakened the entity until my family moved in just last week. It's been feeding off my wife and kids in the basement," I said. "Feeding? It's still using their bodies?" Noah asked. "My wife." I paused as my own voice cracked. This was more difficult than I realized saying it out loud. "Audrey is gone. The demon created a new body for itself, and it's going to do the same for my children. And I think that after that, it will spread and infect other homes," I admitted. "Then why come meet me? Just leave. Get away from here and forget about this place. Your family's gone," Noah insisted. I held back a tear as I clenched my fist. "You think I don't know that?" A few of the orderlies looked at me in surprise, and I controlled my anger so as to not cause a scene. "But you know as well as I do that running away solves nothing. Too many people have suffered because of this thing. I want to kill it." I swallowed a gulp of air and offered a proposal to him. 8 years ago, you managed to wound it enough to keep it dead for at least this long. You must have done something different," I said. Noah looked at me like I was a madman. Maybe I was. Then he laughed. "You want to know my big secret, do you? It's the reason I went to jail. I killed Jasper. Yeah, my own boy. He was 6. He stood up and jabbed his finger in my face.
Do you have any idea what it takes to watch the innocence fade from your kids' eyes as you're holding their heart in your hand? But I knew it was the only way to stop this evil. I had to stop it before others were hurt. I could see the anger there. It was the same passion that drove me now. Help me, please. You and I seem to be free of the influence this thing has. Let us use that to our advantage and get rid of it once and for all, I urged him. You're joking, right? What's your plan, nuke the place? And how are you going to get me out of here anyway? He asked with a laugh. You know the answer to that. I paused and leaned forward, whispering my plan to him. He actually smiled for the first time. The house demon has powers to manipulate people, right? So it can certainly get you to be brought to it if it so chooses. So if I made it believe you were offering yourself willingly, then there wouldn't be an objection from the staff. It's crazy, but it might work. Noah agreed. So then we just go and burn the thing down. And do you have a better method? I asked. He crossed his arms and laughed again. I have a bad feeling about this, but sure. Why the heck not? By afternoon, Noah and I were headed toward the house. It took little to convince the demon of his interest. It remembered the wound that he had caused, and the entity made it clear that it wanted to exact revenge. And from the way that Noah was fidgeting, I could see that he was eager to do the same. I was sure this would be the last time I set foot in this house. One way or another, it was ending here. The door opened on its own accord as we stepped on the porch. Noah and I both felt a cold chill, and I knew the demon was back at full strength again. It didn't really need us. Now, it was going to dispose of us as obstacles so that it could go elsewhere. As if to confirm that, I saw the stranger and two children I didn't recognize sitting in the den, waiting. To the side of the girl stood a lifelike husk of Kelly, and the same of Adrian was near the boy. My poor children, taken and destroyed by this evil. It was pulling at my heartstrings, but I knew that it was too late for them. Apparently Noah recognized the stranger and the boy. Jasper, how dare you continue to use my son's body for your purposes, you monsters, he said as he clenched his fist. It then occurred to me the stranger had to be the woman that had killed Jasper, and this girl only a few years back. A desperate attempt to stop the evil from spreading that was now backfiring. He was the first one to awake us. It seems only fitting he continues to be our primary vessel. The woman and Jasper and the girl all spoke in unison. That won't be happening. This is going to end and you are going to die, Noah responded. You think I don't realize you came here to kill us? You will fail. I shook my head. I actually had a different motive, one that I hadn't even told Noah about. I remembered the pastor's words about undoing old sins, and though it seemed crazy, I made a conscious decision to try something unorthodox. You want to spread and go elsewhere? Then use my body, it's healthy, and it's not going to be something that people question either. You can leave this place and go where you want, but if you do that, you'll have to give these souls back to the bodies that you took them from. My family. Bring them back. I know that you have the power to do that now, I said. Noah looked at me in shock. You can't be serious. This thing would just use you as a puppet. It needs me, the same way that it needed you all those years ago. I'm not sure why, but I feel our roles as fathers serve its distinct purpose in its own evolution. I saw the demon girl twitch, and I remarked, it knows that it can't leave here with these three bodies. It fed on my family simply to regain strength. Now it needs to be able to expand. I offered myself again, and swore to the demon. I'll make whatever oath you want, but my family needs to be freed of your grasp. They didn't hurt you. Honor them by letting them go, I insisted. No, I won't allow this, Noah said. He pulled out the knife that he had brought and snapped. You think you're so smart, but I've been willing to kill before to stop this thing, and I'll do it again. He pushed me to the ground and slammed his weapon into my shoulder, causing me to scream out. To be honest, his response was a part of my plan, but I saw that the demon recognized the potential it had to use me and immediately lashed out toward Noah. "You were the one that took our survival and freedom from us. You will regret ever stepping in our path." I saw the moment of distraction and leapt at the chance. I grabbed the knife and pulled it off my shoulder just as the demon pushed toward him in full force. And then I tackled Jasper to the ground and jabbed him repeatedly in the chest. Even as I had completed the act, I saw the color in Adrian's cheeks begin to return. The plan was working. The demon screamed at the realization that I was turning on it even as Noah took out his next weapon of choice, a simple match. He lit it and tossed it at the woman, causing her clothes to catch fire as I kept trying to make Jasper lose consciousness. I had to keep telling myself that this was not a kid. It was a monster, and I had to stay strong for Adrian. Suddenly, the house rumbled and shook with all its might. I saw bars begin to grow on the windows and the floor move and try to swallow us whole. The entire house was fighting back. The demon was using all of its resources to stop what would come next. But I didn't hesitate anymore. I tossed the weapon next straight at the girl's back and shouted to Noah, "Do it, now!" He kicked the woman off and then ripped off his jacket, revealing a makeshift explosive he had made. It wasn't easy to get the materials without raising any red flags, but we had been cautious. And this would be enough to do the trick if he could get the demon back to where this had all started, the basement. "Surprise!" he shouted as he tackled the woman to the ground and they both tumbled toward the basement. I crawled toward my children, grabbing their hands and pulling them as I raced toward the entranceway. I had only seconds to escape. The door itself was beginning to close the way a lion's maw would, and the entire property creaked and groaned as I leapt out, my children in my arms. And then everything burst into flames. I tumbled onto the porch as I heard the screams of 1,000 demons fill the night, and the top of the house spilled off, debris tumbling in every direction. I collapsed in exhaustion as I clutched Adrian and Callie, and I struggled to help them breathe. As the last remnants of the house flew up in the air, they both started to wake up and I sobbed in relief. It was finally over. The fire department was on the scene in less than 10 minutes. I provided the best statement that I could of a home accident that had taken my wife and Noah. I claimed that he had been holding them hostage in the basement and then finally decided to end things once and for all. They hadn't made it to the debris down there yet, but they accepted my version of events pretty easily, given the man's track record of violence. As I was given a warm mug of coffee, I laid my wife to rest in a nearby empty garden. I held Adrian and Callie close to me as they cried and tried to comprehend what had happened. Honestly, I'm not sure they will ever know. I don't have much to remember her by, but I will do my best to live the rest of my life trying to find a reason to go on. I have never really been a believer, but I think I felt Audrey smiling down on me as I laid her ashes to rest. I did it. I saved our kids. And they insisted on taking us to a local hospital for examination to make sure that we were fine, and I accepted. I had a feeling that I would need some intense therapy after this last week. As I sat there in recovery, I saw my kids get their own examination in a room adjacent to mine, and I thought about Noah. How he was now at peace too with his own family, and I was doomed to be a guilty survivor. Then there was a knock at the door. "John?" It was one of the officers that had brought me here. "I just wanted to let you know that everything has been cleared up, and we got a statement and you're clear." For a moment, I was at a loss for words. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" I asked. Then in the doorway, I saw standing there a man in handcuffs that should be dead. Noah Hunt. "Mr. Hunt has confirmed what you told us at the property. It seems he had also had help from a few of our officers and the real estate agent. I'm so sorry that you had to go through with this. We are putting this monster back where he belongs as soon as possible." Noah looked at me with those same cold, dead eyes, and immediately I knew. No, you can't send him to a prison. John, he tried to kill his own son. He held your family hostage for a week before killing your wife. We're nailing this guy hard. No, you don't understand. I screamed as I strained to get up. It's quite all right, John. Noah said in that same monotone voice. The demon's eyes fired up as he added, I've accepted my fate to return to the gallows. Why, you could almost say it's like going home again.